At 65 Stone Street. If we can, if I can get Deputy Mayor Goins to lead us in pledge, and then if Chief, if you don't mind, Chief Lamb, if you can lead us in our invocation after the pledge.
Yes, sir.
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let us pray. Dear gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. We thank you for the rain that you've given us today, Lord. We pray you continue to watch over our lovely city, Lord, and all the employees who continue to work each day to ensure that our needs are met for our citizens in the community. Thank you, Lord, for all that you do for us. Watch over our council as we prepare to go into the budget season, and be with us. In your holy name we do pray. Amen.
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 Roll call, please.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Deputy Mayor
Here.
Councilmember Bovair.
Here.
Councilmember Cross.
Here.
Councilmember Warner.
Here.
City Attorney Garganese. Interim City Manager Fura.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna move on to item number 2, which is our agenda, which is the budget for 2021.
Second.
We got a motion from Councilman Bovair, a second from Deputy Mayor Goins. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All right. We're gonna move on to our first subject. Our workshop topic is current budget update. Hopefully this shouldn't take, but it's about a 45-minute meeting. Time certain.
Yes.
I heard that yesterday.
Plus we have reports. Is that in there?
What's that?
Reports should have been in the agenda.
Get that, Monica?
Yeah, we can still do that.
Not yet.
Oh, come on. Matt's been working hard on this. Let's let him do his job.
You gonna start?
When everyone's ready.
Yes, sir. We're ready.
All right, Mayor, members of City Council, we're before you tonight to provide an update on the development of the fiscal year 2021 budget. At our last meeting in May, after a delay from the COVID-19 pandemic, we kind of got started with our priorities-based budget workshop late, and here we are a month later. We have developed that line item budget, working in partnership with all the departments, as well as taking into account your priorities and programming them into the fiscal year 2021 budget. And tonight we will be presenting to you kind of an outlook in the future, and then a to-date snapshot of where we're at with the development. And so with that, I'd like to cover the agenda for tonight. We'll start out by talking about the budget development timeline, where we're at in that process, what we're looking at for horizon issues that have internal and external factors that influence our revenues and expenditures in this upcoming year and in the future. Look at current year COVID-19 impacts to our revenue, as well as some modifications that we've done to the current year budget to mitigate those impacts, and then move into the fiscal year 2021 preliminary budget, and talk about some of those priorities that came up at the last workshop, and how staff's been able to integrate those into the fiscal year 2021 budget. And then we also have Stantec, the city's financial consultant, on the line to also provide an interactive model that's integrated into this presentation. So City Council, as well as the community, has an opportunity to see the long-term outlook of the various funds for the city, as well as get an understanding of the impacts and the changes to those funds over the 10-year period. So, and we'll close things out with the fiscal year 2021 budget calendar that would take us all the way through to adoption. So as we start out and we talk about the public budget timeline, you can see that we had the budget kickoff in March. That didn't necessarily happen. That was more like May due to the pandemic. And so here we are now in June at the Fiscal Sustainability Budget Priorities Workshop. Towards the end of July, that second meeting, we have our Truth in Millage presentation, and then in August, the public hearings. In September, the first public hearing and final public budget hearing for the millage, setting the millage and adopting that budget. And just as a side note, while that's the public process, we also have an internal process that begins, even as early as December, January, possibly in utilities case, they start looking at some of that capital programming and as early as November. So it's really an ongoing process that we're in. And just want to touch on a few things as we look at the city's overall financial position. There's a couple of goals that were set out in the city's strategic plan, and that was to maintain long-term fiscal sustainability and to promote greater transparency in budgeting and financial matters. As you can see, since that time, we've earned both the CAFR Award and then the Distinguished Budget Award. Both of those we continue to carry, and we submit for on an annual basis. And so we will continue to do that program. The city's general fund is currently assigned a AA2 rating from Moody's Investors. And then the latest update we had, and I think it was shared at the last meeting as well, but the utilities rating enterprise fund was modified from a AA positive to a AA stable outlook by S&P, and that's really just due to, at that time, the outlook of the pandemic and maybe the influences from that public health emergency.
So that was really just from external circumstances, that had nothing to do with our internal workings or budget.
That is correct. And
Okay.
in their evaluation, there were a number of utility systems around Florida that received a downgrade at the same time.
Okay.
So it wasn't like they evaluated specifically the city's utility fund, singled us out. It was more of a sweeping kind of change. So as we talk about some of those horizon issues that could lead to some of those longer term impacts and maybe a change in our financial position, we want to talk about a couple of them that feed into those expenditure costs. Public safety pensions, just to touch on those, the fire unfunded annual accrued liability did increase as we go into this next year, and that was due to not poor performance, but more so they're really making an effort to true up their actual investments. Now, their assumed rate of return was higher than what they were actually receiving. So when you make that adjustment to move it from the 8% to the 7.6%, it has a significant impact on those futures. It's compounded over time, and through the actuary, they estimate that increase for the city's payment for this next year, an increase of $720,000. So that's quite significant. They still maintain a 73% funded ratio. The police union, while they have made corresponding changes, they're actually moving towards more incremental changes with that assumed rate of return, and they're still in a very good position. They actually realized a savings to the city of $68,000 for this upcoming year. Another primary concern for the city that not only impacts the cities, but it also impacts our employees is our health insurance. Annually, we've seen increasing costs, which is comparable to the industry standard. We've seen some increases beyond that, in large measure due to being self-funded. We're paying on the actual claims, and so depending on the year, it can fluctuate greatly. And so what we're projecting for this next year is a 7.5% increase, which is slightly higher than the industry average. And when we last met with you all, we were looking at about 15%. And the reason why it's dropped off was because, as we look at a year's trend of claims, May of last year had a number of large claims in it, which now drop off. And at the same time, the COVID-19 pandemic is having a kind of an adverse impact with the delivery of healthcare services. Folks just aren't going in and getting treated to some extent for the elective surgeries and unnecessary or non-emergency related treatments. And so we're seeing those claims come down, actually. And so we saw that in the decrease.
But Matt, once this pandemic is over, that'll change, we think, right?
There's a lot of thoughts on that. You may have some pent-up use, if you will. Those that have been deferring those elective surgeries, now that it's open or safe, may elect to do that. And so we're cognizant of that. It may be that, well, I missed my appointment this year, I'll just catch it next year. So we may have some drop-off as well.
But they're also, I understand, anticipating, as the healthcare industry overall has moved to more, an increase in the ability to treat people remotely and,
Yeah.
online.
Yeah, and
That's some
certainly-
reduced expenses.
Yeah, and the city has, through our insurance carrier Cigna, they offer that. A number of our employees have used that, and we actually recommend that if you have symptoms of COVID-19, rather than going to a location where others are present, as well as our own health center offering those services. So,
Can I just ask then, so we have 650,000 approximately from the retirement funds that'll be coming out of this year's budget to kind of shore it up.
is that for? Are you speaking about the healthcare or the?
No, I'm looking at the
Pensions.
pensions.
That's unfunded liability.
So maybe it's 720, that's going to come out of this year's budget?
Yeah, that's what we budget for, and it's based on last year's actuarial report. And then the final item down there, just so you're aware, that agreement with Lee Winter Park, when we acquired that, within that agreement, the county remits $60,000 annually out of the District 4 revenues to the city. That contribution ends not this upcoming fiscal year, but the next. So just something to be aware of, because there is an increased cost of operation associated with that park. And I believe we're providing a much higher level of service than what was previously provided, and will continue to do so. So that'll be a cost that the city's general fund will absorb. We also have the solid waste contract. Our current provider, Waste Management, we've been with them for many years, and that contract will expire, and we will be going out for services this next fiscal year. And what we're seeing in other areas is pretty significant increase in costs. Brevard County just recently did, and they looked at a pretty sizable increase. We did receive a letter from Waste Management related to recyclables. They would like to add on an additional fee for the collection of recyclables due to that commodities market, some of the changes since the contract was originally negotiated. So I'm certain as we do that RFP and go to selection, that we may see some elevated costs.
But yet they won't tell us how much they're making from the recyclables. I mean, that was a question that came up. How much are you making from the recyclables? People are putting some people are really into recycling. I know I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
So I know before the question came up, what are you guys making from recycling? They said they didn't have to disclose that to us. And but yet you want an increase, so.
Yeah, and we have our Sustainability Advisory Committee has that, and they're going to be evaluating that and providing some information to City Council as it comes before you. natural disasters. In Florida, we're always monitoring we're in hurricane season. We always monitor that and hope for the best. Obviously, last year we prepared for the worst, and I think we ended up with the best with Hurricane Dorian. We're still awaiting, though, FEMA funding as a result of Hurricane Irma. We should anticipate that sometime in the next year, though, with the conclusion of those projects down at the waterfront. Also, the COVID-19 impact. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more depth. Last time we met, we had some preliminary information, a lot of uncertainty. There still is some uncertainty, but we do have some concrete numbers that we can share with you all tonight. And then the final item, this is really going back a few years, but I think it's important as now, I think in the Florida House, there's been some conversation about bringing this back and actually implementing that internet sales tax as the state looks for additional revenue due to the losses, and that could bolster the state's revenue. So we'll continue to watch that. I don't think at this point they'll be sharing any of that directly with the city, but it will assist in their ability to remit those sales tax dollars to the city. So what we know about COVID-19. I think we kind of talked about last time that this was a pretty unique event in that the economy kind of went into hibernation mode, and then when is it going to wake up and how is it going to wake up? Well, I think it woke up maybe too early, and we got parts of it going back to sleep now, and so we're really kind of monitoring what happens here. And we've seen a dramatic rise in the number of cases here recently, so we don't really know where this is going to lead to, if it leads to another shutdown that could impact those state sales tax revenues further, or cause long-term impacts due to unemployment that eventually reach the housing market and impact our other tax sources. So it's turning out to be quite the unique event, and just for councils and the community's information, specifically March, April, and May, the state sales taxes were down significantly. They did release some information to us, and basically that March, April, May, and June, since it's hard for the state to deal in real-time information or data related to sales tax remittance, because it's coming and going almost on a daily basis, what they had elected to do was remit to the cities 50% of what their projections were for the months of March, April, May, and June, and then they would their fiscal year actually concludes at the end of June. So come July 1, when they can close the books, evaluate where they're at, they will actually then evaluate an August true-up. So those dollars they remit to us in August will reflect the actual true-up. So it's hard to say what we'll receive in August on those numbers, but I think it's safe to say that, assuming a 50% reduction, at least in some of those early months, probably wasn't enough. Hopefully in these latter months it was, so it kind of balances out. So we'll continue to monitor that, and we've got some actual numbers to show you here shortly.
We all went to shopping online where there's no sales tax.
Yeah. Property values. As we talk about some of the property values right now, the housing market is pretty strong, and we're not really seeing a whole lot of impact. The property appraiser provided us with preliminary values, and it's around a 6% increase. So for Cocoa, that's actually pretty strong. So that's good news. The real question is, what happens in future years with that? Because as we know, it takes a lot longer to dig your way out of that than it does necessarily the sales tax. And so with that, the unemployment, another key characteristic, as you can see there, it's still trending pretty high. We do know that, while we have some claims here listed, there's been some struggles with the state system, so while we're trying to monitor it on a daily or weekly basis, it really is, you get a bunch of data, and then there's nothing for a while, and there's a bunch, so they're working on correcting that. And then the final item is that the CARES Act funding that the county received. They did allocate the use of $4.4 million of that for the housing rental assistance, utility assistance, and they are allowing cities to submit their incurred costs during the pandemic, not only to date, but also a projection to December. We did submit that to the county here recently, as well as executed that interlocal agreement with them so they could disperse those funds to us. And that amount for the city is approximately $230,000. So,
Did that take into an account a reoccurrence or a surge as we're experiencing now?
yeah, so what that's made up of are actual costs the city incurred. I mean, we had some technology needs immediately related to telework, where we had to secure some additional equipment that's eligible under the program. So those costs are in there. And then as we talk about hand sanitization, masks, and some of those other items, we simply had to estimate what the use rate was and then provide that to them. Now, it doesn't mean, it's my understanding that we're locked into that, but they wanted an estimate to determine, okay, the cities have, approximately this much PPE need, and so we have this much funding available to look at supporting private businesses or property owners, rental assistance further.
So it doesn't include us distributing PPE needs to any other businesses or anyone else in the city?
Not at this time. I can tell you, though, that working with Chief Lamb here recently, we have the ability to secure a number of at least surgical masks and maybe assemble a kit for our local businesses that we can distribute to them. That, of course, would be at a cost to the city, with unknown if it could be reimbursed through this program or another in the future. So,
Now, where are we at now with the county with reference to distributing those other millions of dollars? What was it, 105 million they got?
yeah, there was
Yeah.
105 total. They allocated 4.4,
Yeah.
and last I heard, they were going to talk about it in July. I do know there's a lot of needs out there in the county.
Oh, yeah, and throughout, and I know most counties have already distributed their monies and their funds out, and I'm just wondering what kind of talks have there been. I know I haven't heard any, and there's been some emails sent with reference to that, what's going on, so I'm just curious if you all heard something that we didn't hear.
Yeah, I think you know about as much as I do on that. So we'll continue to watch, and if any information is requested of us, we'll certainly provide that.
I hope that include the interest that they're getting from that as well.
Well, in our discussions, we could ask them.
I mean, the idea of them getting it is that they distribute it, not that they sit on it.
Yeah, and so this slide you all have seen before. It's proven to be pretty accurate as far as the revenue assumptions that Stantec used to kind of give us a forecast of what kind of impact we might see. And we are trending on that fiscal year 2020 high impact right now. As we look at all those revenue sources, they're trending pretty close to their assumption. And so, as you also recall, and at I believe it was a May City Council meeting, you all approved an amendment to the fiscal year 2020 budget to reduce some expenditures with frozen vacant positions, as well as projects that were in the fiscal year 2020 budget to help mitigate some of those revenue losses in the near term. We are still continuing to monitor for other expenditure decreases as we go. As positions become vacant, we do an analysis on each of them to see if there's a way we can maintain the same level of service at potentially a reduced cost, or we can maintain our costs and increase our level of service. And so we're evaluating that on a case-by-case basis. As you can see here, this was something that the finance staff just kind of wanted to put out there for context as we look at COVID-19, and then if we want to compare it to the Great Recession from 2008. And what you can see is if you apply today's revenues with the reduction or change from the 2008 Great Recession, you can see that revenue loss that the city would sustain. And of course, you can see here, there's the ad valorem is in there, as well as the sales tax items, the building permits, pretty significant. And so, not that that's where we're headed, but just for an example of where we were at one time. And so, it will be interesting to see how this all shakes down and impacts compared to the Great Recession of 2008.
We had a pretty good reserve at that time that kind of helped us through.
Yeah.
Because I remember there was no layoffs, there was no furloughs, and a lot of stuff stopped. But I mean, the reserves really helped us out because we had, like I said, way more than we actually was required to have in there at the time.
Yeah, and it's always a combination of actions. You look at expenditure controls as well as relying on those reserves, and that's what it's there for. All right, so we'll go ahead and get into the fiscal year 2021 general fund overview. Starting out, just talking about the various sources of revenue that the city has. Obviously the taxes, permits and fees, intergovernmental, charges for services, fines and forfeitures, miscellaneous, and other non-revenue. As you can see here, here's a trend of those actual revenue sources. And you can see over time there's some changes within those. I think one of the more notable ones is if you look at the gray one there, the other permits and fees, the building permits in 2017, you can see that was actually Walmart paid their building permit fees, and then you can see it kind of step down. But if you look at those gray columns in 2020, 2021, you can see that growth that's occurring. In fact, for fiscal year 2020, I think we've already realized our budget estimate for that revenue. So those are really good things. It just kind of shows that that growth continues in the city of Cocoa and we're moving in the right direction. If we look at it, those revenues by source, we wanted to kind of show you the percent change. Now, it's not real significant. I think what is real positive is that taxes on the top, there's a 4% increase in change. For the city of Cocoa, that's really positive. We never seem to get too high, never seem to get too low. We have a lot of properties in the city that are, their valuation, when you put on the homestead exemption and other exemptions, their taxable value in the end isn't as much as other communities. And so, that kind of makes us immune to some of those forces to some extent. So it is a plus when you're looking at a downturn, but we don't realize the same appreciation as some other communities.
Do we know what percentage of residential properties in the city fall under that, where they pay no ad valorem taxes at all? I know at one time it was almost 50%.
Yeah, we ran some numbers on that as far as those just purely on valuation versus those eligible for those exemptions. And I couldn't tell you off the top of my head now where we're at, but it's a significant number. Mm-hmm. I know we have received some appreciation over the past few years, so it's brought some of them out, so there is a contribution. We also have a high percentage of rental properties, mm-hmm. of which they're not eligible for those exemptions that do pay. So
kind of balances out.
It's kind of interesting.
Is it a lot of trouble to get us that number? At some point, I would be really interested in
we can
knowing
seek that data out.
That's really significant.
It used to be 50%. As a matter of fact, the first year I joined the council in 1999, our taxes from ad valorem was less than $1 million.
Yeah.
So we've really moved up when it comes to that. And I mean, to me, that for 20 years, that's a significant change right there for 10 million for this coming year's budget. But,
$500,000 a year.
yeah. But yeah, it was like 50% of the properties in Cocoa paid absolutely no ad valorem taxes at one time.
We have our a number of veterans as well that are 100% disabled. That
Yeah, the whole Space Coast.
yeah.
Yep. Intergovernmental, you see the reduction there, and that's assuming the reduction in the sales tax largely. But, as you look over towards the right, as a percentage of our budget, our revenue, it's 5%. So a 15% reduction isn't real drastic. I mean, you can see it there, 300,000 or so. As we look down, fines and forfeitures may jump out at you, 29% down. That's not a revenue source that we rely on to fund programs. That's simply there. The police department can draw upon that for training or equipment. The miscellaneous, you can see that percentage there is down 37%, but really makes up 1% of the city's budget. Other non-revenue, interfund transfers, water, sewer, return on investment, you do see that increase. Largely, that increase there does come from unassigned fund balance reserves. We do have a pretty significant project in the city's general fund. The city's enterprise resource plan is 1.5 million, and that's coming from our reserves transferred into the general fund. So overall, a 3% increase. If you look at those numbers, it almost it represents a decrease if you take that significant project out. So what that tells you is the departments did a lot of work this year to bring that in, recognizing the potential fiscal challenges that we may have this current year as well as future years. As we look at those expenses then broken down by department, you see that 24% increase in City Council's budget, 1% of budget. That's largely the city's strategic plan. So we can move that forward this next year. City Manager's Office, 14% decrease. Really looked hard into those funds, information technology, as well as the City Manager's Office, and we made some cuts there. General operations, you see that's where the enterprise resource plan is, nearly accounting for that entire increase there in that department. Admin services, 4% decrease. Police, a 3% increase. Largely when you have a majority of your costs due to personnel and you're providing 3% raises through the contract or the collective bargaining agreements, and then on top of that also the pension, they can cut all the operating they can, and it's very difficult to realize a decrease in their overall budget.
Matt, have you taken a look? I've seen some cities where just their police and fire budget and salaries run almost 50% of their budget. We're at like 41. Are we like in the ballpark with that? Are we on the low side of what cities are paying?
Yeah, I mean, we look at police, fire, and public works generally because, I mean, those are the core services, and they're, Rebecca can correct me, but I think they're around 81, 82%. I believe just those three departments alone, which is pretty common. They make up the lion's share of the general fund because those are the services we're actually providing to the citizens. A lot of the other services that you see up here are internal support to those to help them do their jobs. So.
Yeah, I've been looking at some cities that were saying like police is 30% of their budget, fire is 20% of their budget. We seem to be a little bit lower than some of those. So I was just wondering if we'd done any comparisons and if it's because of our salaries or.
Yeah, I think, I mean, if you look at the general operations, you drop that one project off for $1.5 million. That changes those percentages.
Yeah.
So I think it does put you pretty close to 30% there for police, and then fire probably around 20%. So fire, they don't have a whole lot of operating, but they've got a few items in there, some extrication tools, and then that large increase, that pension contribution is also in there. So even with that, they're at a 5% increase. Community services saw a reduction there of 6%, and then public works a reduction of 7%, and a lot of that was capital expenditures. And so overall, you're looking at a 3% increase, which is pretty good when you're looking at a 7.5% increase for healthcare and 3% increase for all the employees. And as we look at those core municipal services, you can see it right there. The fire, public works, and police make up the lion's share of the pie, and then the support services, they're out on the last bit there. Yeah, 81%, the core municipal services, which is the fire, public works, and police. So as we spoke at the last meeting, I had a slide with a number of items on it that were capital in nature. Some of them that we had already eliminated through the CIP process and deferred to the next fiscal year. We've since done a little bit more work and have reduced these from the fiscal year 2021 budget to include those 7 unmarked police patrol cars. We know we have a need for those out on the street, to have marked patrol cars on the street, and so that was really the focus. Now those are at a higher cost, but at a higher need to the community, and so those were funded.
And you said those were hybrids?
Yeah, they're actually, you can't even buy a police patrol car anymore. Everything's gone to SUVs, and there happened to be an SUV that has a hybrid powertrain that our fleet manager took a look at, and he looked at the idle time of our patrol vehicles, and that hybrid system will run off a battery while running the air conditioning, and so you don't continue to turn the engine, burn fuel, and put wear and tear on the vehicle. And so we actually just received 3 of those 6 from last year. They're over at the fleet compound right now. So they're actually quite a nice vehicle, and they're getting those outfitted for the street right now. So
Thought about that when we talked about it the other day, because I know you said there were 49 cars in the fleet. We needed to remove like 7, but we needed to, in order to do our asset management, replace 7 cars a year because they have about a 7-year lifespan.
yeah, to keep pace.
Those are the combustion engines, though. I think the hybrids actually have longer lifespan.
We hope so. We don't know yet, but we really do hope so. And we'll continue to monitor that. Tony does a good job of logging the data and then reporting back as far as the use and what he's seeing, because he's directly servicing them. So he has a very good idea. The police scanning and mapping, that's for the crime scene tech. That actually may be something that the police department may be able to do this year.
That the scanning device that does the entire scene?
Yep. It's the same system that the Brevard County Sheriff's Office uses, so that has an advantage for us. If we have a large crime scene or we need their assistance, we have the same equipment. Their crime scene folks can just step right in and work with us. So you may be seeing that at a future agenda item for this year. Traffic response trailer, that was removed in favor of some more of the signs that we can place around the community that monitor the speed, as well as utilizing the additional digital message displays that we have throughout the city to provide messaging to the community. We talked about the rescue for the fire department, their pumper truck. That one's been deferred 1 year. That will be a critical need in next year's budget. So as we look at our capital spending, that's almost half of it right there. So
Jonathan, let's just buy that one on Merritt Island for 29 grand. That'll work for a couple of years after. The 1938 Ford, it's still running. It's got to be a good truck, right? Okay.
We already have one of those.
It's not as nice as this one.
Fire inspector vehicle, public works replacement vehicle, that's for a flatbed truck that they utilize their existing one to put that concrete mixer on the back of.
How many trucks was that, the 72,000? One truck?
What's that?
It's one truck.
Public works replacement vehicle, 73,000, how many vehicles?
That's, I believe, just the one. They do have, they have a replacement flatbed in, I think, for 87,000, but this, I can't recall if that's one or multiple vehicles.
One
It's
vehicle.
one, yeah. I think it was one of the heavy-duty trucks, yeah. Fleet Faster upgrade, that's the software that's used to monitor our vehicle fleet, as well as export data on the work orders, and monitor the fuel consumption and all that. We have a software system. This is just an upgraded software. And then the one elevator controller, I think we spoke about this last time, that the police department and the Porsche house have elevators in them, and there's been some changes to the Florida building code that requires some updates. And so we're still working with our building official to make a determination on the Porsche house if it's even necessary. And so we deferred that cost out. We're still working on the police department cost to see if we can reduce that further. But overall, it was a reduction of 1.2 million. Important to note, and you'll probably see that this fiscal year, we're hopeful that we're putting it out to bid, because we did get an initial quote on the fuel tanks over there at Fleet. The underground fuel tanks, they failed the DEP inspection, and so we are looking at doing that this fiscal year. Go ahead and get that project started, and so we're going to put that out to bid to see if we can realize a cost savings on that, and we anticipate that project to cost somewhere around $400,000 to $500,000, and that'll actually install above ground tanks with a pretty significant lifespan, higher level of serviceability, and really ensure that we can continue to provide for the fleet in the future. So.
And that's a common practice now. You're seeing that all over. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do want to highlight, while we're not adding any additional new personnel for this year, there were some requests, and you can see those before you, as well as the payroll analysis, and you can see those totals from each department up above. We do have some positions for the utilities department and the enterprise fund as well that I'm still working with Jack in evaluating those. They may be brought into the upcoming year's budget, but for the sake of tonight, they're not included in there, but we're still working on that side of it.
Are there frozen planner positions?
We currently have a vacant senior planner position that we're recruiting for.
Okay.
These budget numbers, those are salaries and benefits, not just salaries, right? Okay.
Yeah, yep. So as you see, like the senior license and permit technician, that includes their Florida retirement system, all the
Health
FICA
insurance,
and
yeah.
everything else. Yep.
Okay.
In the payroll coordinator position, I understood that we were going to every 2-week pay system, that we can actually
Yeah.
need less.
Yeah, so by making that move organizationally to a biweekly payroll, we don't believe that that position would be necessary. And so we're still working with some of our employees to finalize that, and we'll be bringing that to City Council either at the first meeting in July, the next regular meeting, or the last meeting in July.
So there's a possibility of later on down the road somehow getting a couple more planners so we can move things a little bit faster.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, I mean, there's, you go down there now, there are a series of plans for review,
Oh, yeah.
and they're not simple matters. And so we've got several critical projects that our planning staff's been diligently working on. We moved over one staff member to economic development that's still assisting with planning, and so just as at last night's council meeting, number of ordinance changes. Those don't just come about by writing an agenda item. There's significant research and careful thought that goes into that from both planning as well as the city attorney's office. So.
Yeah, like I said, there's so much going on. It's like, wow, I don't even know how they even get through it. What they've gotten through with is just amazing to me.
Well, planners are not as scarce as building officials, but they're still not a dime a dozen either, so.
Yeah, and it's something that, they're doing their review for a reason, and it's out of protection for the city.
Oh, yeah.
And so, to put a lot of pressure on them to really push some of this stuff is not always the prudent thing to do, so.
I could tell you when I was on council before, man, you went on the second floor, and I mean, almost every booth in there, or every cubicle in there was occupied, and it was just busy. And and that was nothing compared to things that are happening now, and it's just amazing that, I don't know how they function with what they have, but somehow they manage.
It's so hard to compete against the private sector that's paying so much more than we can pay, it's.
Yeah, we really find that in the building department.
Yeah, and a lot of young people don't think long-term when it comes to retirement and benefits. They're about that weekly paycheck. And working for municipal government, it's about the retirement and the benefits, not the weekly paycheck. So that somehow or other doesn't translate in some of today's college graduates, so.
Yeah, there's many fields that, we compete directly with the private market on, and so there are some challenges there.
Definitely.
As we talked about City Council's priorities from the last meeting, we went ahead and evaluated those and then looked at the budget, found a way that we could provide enhanced services in those areas. And what you'll see up above, we categorized them into community improvements, and I think it was unanimous amongst all the council that they want to see an improved image throughout the city in our public spaces. And what you'll find is not only have we added a few personnel this year to the grounds and beautification staff, but we're still evaluating a couple open positions to make that happen for this year. And then we did receive the state inmate mowing crew. They're back with us. We're working to get a second, which helps our staff focus on those key areas with high visibility and providing a higher level of care than we're going to get from a contractor or the state inmate crews. So you can see a 33% increase in the mowing contracts, and we're currently bidding all of the landscaping and mowing contracts within the city. We kind of bundled them all together to see if we could achieve some kind of savings. So we're hopeful that that will also maximize our expenditures. The nuisance abatement within the Code Enforcement Division of the Police Department, we actually added a little bit to that because while we can control the public spaces, we also have issues sometimes on the private spaces that need immediate addressing. And so we did add a little bit there, and that's something that if you give it to them, they will spend it because we have needs in the city. And so we did add a little bit there. The Parks Master Plan is underway. As soon as that's complete, we'll know a little bit more about what the capital and programming needs are here within the city and where our opportunities lie. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit, especially as we move towards that projection by Stantec. Community security cameras. There's a desire to install some of those in the parks and some of our higher crime areas. We'd like to do that actually this fiscal year. And so we're working with the Housing Authority right now in their system to identify specific equipment that we could tie into theirs, as well as them utilizing some resources of the city in a partnership and get those installed and up and functioning. And you'll likely see that on a future agenda item.
They've got a great system.
Yeah, and our police department's already using it. So, Aurora Sidewalk that's out there that leads from 520 to the sharing center. We did submit a grant on that. And then we've also got that on the Space Coast TPO's project list. That's about a $445,000 project, but we're working on a couple of different fronts to try and make that project happen sooner than later. Actually, just talking with Bryant here a little bit earlier, there may be another opportunity to see that project through as well. So we talk about the community garden program. There was recently a discussion with the Diamond Square CRA, who has a contract with the city to operate the community garden there on Peachtree Street. And so we're looking at potentially revamping that program. And, you know, we set out on that to kind of, I don't know, create the field of dreams and hope that if you build it, they will come. And the site where it's currently at is somewhat challenged because it's entirely curbed off. There's no access gates, and so just to maintain your own plot, you can't even pull a vehicle in. And so there's challenges for that current garden where it is located to be successful. And so that Diamond Square board is working on that right now, and we will continue to work with them to develop that program. There was a desire to expand affordable housing development within the city. City Council did approve an agenda item to basically designate those vacant surplus properties in the city for affordable housing use. And so we currently have a list of those housing units, and then we also have some collections of vacant land that could be developed, and the city will be proceeding forward with issuance of an RFP for some of those properties. Police traffic enforcement program. That's probably the number one concern. That's the chief, but I'm pretty certain that he hears is traffic in the neighborhood, speeding, people running stop signs. And so, in speaking with him, there might be an opportunity to shift some of our operations to create more opportunities for them to focus on that. And then also, in this year's budget, we're going to be installing some of those radar signs at certain locations in the city, and then we also budgeted for some additional ones in Public Works for the upcoming year.
Well, the program they're using now, putting cars out in the middle of US 1, has definitely caused me to hit my brakes a few times, so thank you for that.
And is there, and Chief Cantaloupe and I discussed this, having, you know, actually cities where they actually, for traffic control, they use cameras. So, you know, you speed through a stop sign, 3 weeks later you get a ticket, and that really teaches you quick.
Well, I can tell you about that. That was.
Yeah, there are some states where that's not legal.
Yeah, I don't think it's legal in Florida.
I was the chair of that committee that was moving that legislation forward for the state, for the Florida League of Cities. And I'll tell you, what happened was that worked out great. There was some good revenue coming in for some of these cities. But then the state got involved as well and decided, okay, we want our cut. Mm-hmm. So they were getting a big chunk of that money, you know, from there. And then some of these cities were getting upset about that. So that plan kind of went debacle. I mean, it just kind of.
We're not going to spend our money to turn it over to the state. That's kind of the attitude.
Yeah, it's just interesting that we start talking about that, and the city attorney returns.
Yeah,
to so
he heard us. Yes, they're talking about red light cameras.
Yes, it was.
Oh, today there was?
And so it was decided.
Today? He
Which
said
way?
the case was decided today.
Oh, no, there's this constant challenge going on down the red light cameras. There was a challenge down in South Florida, and unfortunately, that because the city had an operational policy regarding violating the uniform and traffic regulations of the state. So, another successful defense plan was found down in South Florida.
Where they were allowed to put the cameras up.
Yeah, they were allowed to put the cameras up. There's litigation right from the
A lot of issues.
Well, how can you give a car a ticket? You don't know who's driving it.
Well, no, you send it to. My son came home. I got 3 tickets in one day.
Yeah, but a big
Took my
chunk.
car out.
A big chunk of that go to your state legislators.
Yeah.
But a big chunk of the state legislators don't have nothing to do with it.
I got a couple more programs on there. The Leon and Jewel Collins Museum of African American History and Culture. We're going to go ahead and program $25,000. So no matter what, well, we did submit a grant through the State of Florida Division of Historical Resources, and that was for a $50,000 grant, $25,000 city match. Typically, we wouldn't budget for that until we received the grant, but in this case, we're going to go ahead and program the $25,000, so no matter what, we can ensure that we can get something started over there. And then the second half, we did submit for the final build-out of that facility, the windows, doors, bring them back to their historical context, and that would require a city 50% match on that. And then the final item, I think City Council has heard a number of times, got a lot of unsolved murder cases out there in our community. We did look at the police DNA testing, which is quite expensive on a case-by-case basis, but increasing that, I think that gets us another case evaluation. And so we did look at that, and we're trying to be responsive to the community's needs, and doesn't assure that we're going to solve those, but I think it assists the police department in those future crimes.
So Matt, before we move on.
Yep.
We've had several requests from the community. As you know, we had a workshop this weekend in District 4, museum, a school, and now YMCA since then is, I guess they've taken back their requests since they've closed permanently.
Yeah, we have, there's an upcoming slide we can talk
Oh, there
about
is.
that
Okay.
in more depth. Yep. And then the other component, I kind of broke down City Council's priorities into two areas, the community improvements and then also the employee investment. We talked about the Spanish language incentive. We do have an ad pay currently that's in the LIUNA contract, 75 cents per hour. We utilize that on a daily basis in our customer service division. The educational assistance program, we currently budget $10,000 in that program. It's barely used, I'll tell you right now. So what we're looking at is a program modification.
75 cents per hour, that includes citywide or just the customer service? Because I know you have police officers that speak Spanish, and they've called them at different locations because they do speak Spanish. Do they get that 75 cents an hour more too?
Yeah, right now, that's not a part of their collective bargaining agreement,
Okay.
but I'm pretty certain
They will
they'll
not.
be coming to us, yes.
As soon as they see that, they're going to ask for it.
Yeah.
Yep. So if they're watching out there.
And you know they are.
Yeah. The educational assistance program, that's another thing we've heard from employees as well in the police department too. In that, you know, the way the program's currently set up, you get so much money for obtaining a C, B, and an A. It's at a specific rate based on the state rate. And so we're going to modify that program. I know Tammy's looked at it a way that it's more usable for our employees, and they can take advantage of that. I know some employees want to pursue a higher level of education as another consideration. So we're going to go ahead and be modifying that program, and then we'll continue to monitor the use of that. And, you know, should we expend those funds next year, we'll probably be coming back looking to increase
I
that.
see year 4 up there. You're not just talking about in the.
This is the 4th year of the program.
Oh, okay.
And so we have some data to look at the use of it. And I mean, I can tell you it hasn't been, I don't know that we've even expended the full amount a single year, have we?
No, nobody's used it in utilities at all. And then the general fund, I think there's about 3 people, maybe a year.
Yeah, so it's not being highly used. We want to maybe redevelop that program.
But they do. I'm sure they know about it. It's just.
Yeah, it just may not be suitable for their use. So
We
we're going to.
divert some funds to pay for Spanish lessons, some
Well,
actual on-site.
One consideration always is paying for certifications, and so I'm not I'm not certain at this time. I haven't been presented any information related to that, but there's a
The
lot to
Spanish,
consider.
I was saying, on the Spanish, we actually, they do a proficiency test that we do with CareerSource to ensure that they're very proficient in it. Just because, if we're going to use them to help our customers, we want to make sure
Yeah,
that.
I was thinking about lessons,
Yeah.
actual lessons,
Yeah, we can, definitely something we can look into.
as a way to encourage those that don't speak Spanish.
To learn.
Yeah.
We do have some free lessons in the area from some of our churches are actually teaching Spanish as well as their English language classes. And Portuguese, we have a church teaching Portuguese.
Wow. We also have in there, for our collective bargaining agreements and then for the general employees as well, 3% pay increase for this upcoming year. And that's for general fund as well as utility employees, that's $620,000. So, as I'd mentioned earlier, the employees, that's where you get things done. It's also where you spend the money, and that's an investment in them. The 7.5% increase to the health insurance, that's $338,000 to the city's portion of that cost. Police wage salary survey, that was another thing I think several members brought up. We're currently doing that survey to ensure that we can recruit trained professionals as well as retain those that we already have. And that is something that the union has reached out to us on, and then we're working on our side so we can come together and discuss that with them. Employee minimum wage was brought up to come up with a plan to move the employees to a $15 an hour minimum wage. And so what we'll be doing is a salary survey in fiscal year 2021 at an estimated cost $12,500 that would look at all of our employees, where they're currently at in the market, and give us an idea on that cost. And then at the same time looking at if we were to move those employees then our lowest paid to that $15 an hour and a corresponding increase across the bands, what that cost would be and how do we bite that off over a period of time. And so we'll be working on that this next year.
And I would like to add, that is so important because you're talking $15 an hour, man. You can imagine what that means to someone that's making $10, $11 an hour, that difference. And that difference will affect a lot of things and their attitudes, their work performances, and so forth and so on. I just think that, this is something that should have happened a long time ago, as far as I'm concerned. That's just my personal opinion. But I truly think that this right here is very important.
Do we even have anybody who's working outside in the summer heat making less than 15 an hour? Is kind of startling.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, our maintenance workers,
Yeah. I mean,
All essential.
custodial staff,
Yeah,
meter readers.
yeah,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, it's just amazing to me that anybody would take a job working in 96-degree temperatures outside for less than 15 an hour.
And they do a good job. It's
Yeah.
just, but it's, you would see so much, you would see even more from them if you.
Can you imagine how much of that hourly wage they spend on Gatorade? I mean, seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, Matt, I didn't mean that.
Yeah, it's all right. The employee residency program, we talked about that. And the city has done this, I think in the last year, we actually supported one of our employees with a down payment assistance on a new home. But basically, we get about 60 to 70,000 from home through the state annually. And that would lead to approximately 2 a year that we could do. And so that's something that we've offered across the city, but we could probably focus those efforts with our employee base.
We might want to take a harder look at that program and see if we can't, and not necessarily this year, but, a lot of residents would like to see more of our workers live in the city of Cocoa. right now, the way our program works, I think the maximum that a house can be is, what, 172,000, Nancy? And so that kind of limits what part of the city that they could possibly live in. And I mean, we have some employees who, based on their salary, could probably afford to live in Emerald Lakes or Adamson Creek or out in that 524 corridor, but they're not going to get a house for under 172,000 out there. I think if we change that in some way, that we might be able to move more of our essential workers, especially into the city. I mean, a two-family household, 202 and a quarter for a house is about average these days, so we could move more of our firefighters and more of our police officers into Cocoa if there was a higher level of home that they could afford to buy, like Adamson Creek or Emerald Lakes or whatever. So right now, they can, 172,000, there's not a lot,
Yeah.
you know, so.
Yeah, and I'll work with Nancy on that, but I know there's some requirements under that program that,
And
you
maybe
know,
we have to,
may require some supplemental funds.
Maybe we
from
have to do that,
the
but-
city to achieve that.
that seems to be a big issue. I mean, I get a lot of comments from residents going, why don't our firefighters live here? Why don't our police officers live here? So, you know, something we need to look at.
Yeah, and then we did evaluate a position, a sustainability position. We did some surveying around the state. There's a wide variety of positions that range anywhere from 40 to 100,000 in wages. We looked at the benefits added on to that. It comes out to close to a $100,000 position. That's not in the budget, but something that we've evaluated for future bringing into the budget.
The one that I had talked about, requested, I'm really looking for someone that is really out there generating that grant money and, you know, paying to some degree for their own position.
Yeah.
But that can supplement the director's efforts and, you know, just a real go-getter, somebody that can be on top of that because, I mean, I review these every week when they send them down, and there are lots of things we're eligible for.
Yeah, and actually right now, I mean, we have a grant administrator, and I can tell you right now, he is processing a significant number of grants, and it's not just the application of a grant. It's once you get awarded, following through with it, and then those grants that we have that require quarterly reporting or even more often, he's the one that's following up on that. And so I think we're getting a high level of service out of that position right now.
But it's a really different position, Matt, because I know he's doing all of the accounting for it and the reports, but to actually go forward, to actually have the vision, when you're reading the grant proposals, the RFPs, and then to be able to present the narrative that gets your grant selected, that's a different
Yeah,
kind
a lot
of talent.
Currently, that type of work is done at the department level.
Yeah, and they've got so much to do already.
Yeah, and so those that are monitoring their capital improvement plans have a good idea of what we need to accomplish, and then seeing what may be out there. And so some of that too, we had hoped to use the current vacant senior planner position to assist with some of those sustainability efforts in the interim. But yeah. We want to talk a little bit about the use of general fund balance reserves. I think you all know the policy. We brought in some additional funds into that restricted reserve this year to set that amount that the city sets aside in the event that we have an emergency use. And so I just want to make sure that everyone understands in the public as well that the purpose of the fund balance reserve policy is to ensure that there's adequate liquid resources to serve as a financial cushion for the general fund. And I think that should add a level of comfort for our citizens, knowing that the city has set aside funds as we are in this pandemic, as we're looking at hurricane season. If we were to be impacted by something significant, the city has a funding source there to support our continued operations. And that's something that they need to know and understand, because, as custodians of the taxpayers' dollars, it's not only managing the day-to-day, but ensuring that we can fulfill our mission even in that worst day. And so we plan for that, and we have the policies in place for that. And of course, we utilize available fund balance to fund projects, as we have for this pandemic, any other natural disasters, as well as one-time catalytic capital economic improvement projects that would bring a return on its investment. So as we talk about that, and what's actually coming out of the 2019 CAFR, what we have, and then what we're expending in this fiscal year, per the CAFR, you have 1.6 in the non-spendable, and then 12.2 in the committed stabilization fund, and that's what I just talked about, that emergency reserve, 12.2. We have 6.2 million assigned for certain uses, and then we have 5.2 million unassigned, available for use. And some of that that was found in the CAFR, that was as of September 30th last year, and so we've programmed the use of some of that in this year's budget. And that amount is 2.4 million. That includes Pineda Street, the annual street paving and sidewalks, the electric vehicle, I believe, for the code enforcement manager. We had the separation of the city manager. We had the fiscal year 2019 budget rollover, and then we did receive notice from FEC about 2 railroad crossings that we needed to make repairs to, of which they have since deferred that due to the pending Virgin Train construction. You may see it downtown. We already have that work cart. That's a little electric four-wheeler that the downtown crew uses for landscaping. They've been very happy with that system. And then the police fire system for the IT training, the IT room. There's a server room over there, and per the code, they need to have some fire suppression, but you can't just dump water on electronic equipment, so it's a specialized system. And so what you have remaining at the end of this year, should you expend all that, is $2.7 million. So we're certainly spending those unassigned funds down to a level where we really want to be cautious when we spend those, so we take into consideration future events that could impact the city and our ability to respond. So in fiscal year 2021, we do have a projected use of some of that fund balance, and some of that's in our assigned fund balance, as I mentioned previously, that $1.5 million for the enterprise resource plan, and then our annual paving program of $300,000. So what you have is a total of $1.8 million use of that. At this point in time, we do have a balanced budget, and that budget is balanced based on the use of unassigned fund balance. And you've got those marked patrol vehicles, the police main gate controller there that's fronting 520 and gate, fire extrication equipment. Even though they've applied for a grant, we still have budgeted funds in there because it's an essential piece of equipment that they need to fulfill their mission. There is the police department has some, or actually the fire department. The police department's already prepared to respond to an active shooter. The fire department has put together a program, and they're also prepared to do the same, and they need a little bit of additional equipment. Public Works is the only city facility without access control or the key card access, and so that's currently in the budget with the use of unassigned fund balance. the flatbed truck we talked about earlier in Public Works, and then the Cocoa Village Playhouse HVAC, IT, server room HVAC, and then the remaining 2 units on City Hall HVAC. In the total right now, use of unassigned fund balance, $640,000. Now we're still in June, and we still have some work we can do on the budget, so we're continually evaluating these expenditures as well as others to further reduce that use of unassigned fund balance, because as I mentioned previously, we're at that point where we need to be sustaining our operations on our reoccurring revenue. And I think that's a primary focus for the city, especially as we look at potentially uncertain economic times. This puts the city in a much better position long-term to, control those costs, continue to receive economic development projects that further increase the revenue, to kind of provide that separation of expenditures and revenue, so that you can fill that gap with additional programming for the community. And I think everyone wants to see some improvement in our park system, and that may be one way that you could achieve a pretty significant ongoing investment in the city's parks that would lead to a higher quality of life. So with that, I want to talk about some of the community-based requests. Councilman Koss had mentioned it previously, but we have those right here before us. The first one on the list there is the Cocoa High School. The request, they had 3 different projects: the track, football field, turf, and bleachers. Those projects have been listed in the city's budget in fiscal year 19 and 20. We'd recently met with Cocoa High School to those projects were broken down into a $25,000 contribution each. So we met with the high school because it just continues to be in the city's budget. And we met with the high school to get a scope of services on just a single project. We want to see one of these projects through, and so we don't want to continue to carry this money in the budget year after year. It was budgeted for a purpose, and so they will be submitting to us a scope of services for one of those projects. We'll bring back an interlocal agreement and distribute the funds. So there's an update there. The Brevard Museum, located there off of Michigan Avenue, they've requested $50,000 annually for 3 years for museum operation. They're currently operating at a deficit out there, and they're looking for assistance to continue to keep the doors open. And Councilman,
And, everybody wants money. Like schools, I pay taxes, and I pay school taxes. And now you're jeopardizing, I'm paying double taxes, and I'm paying $75,000 more. The taxpayers, there's just so much we can do.
yeah,
Pay a tax bill, so we don't get taxed over here for $75,000. Now the museum wants $50,000. This ain't the Bank of Cocoa. Let's take care of our employees before we start taking care of Peter, Paul, and Mary. I think we should take care of our own employees before we start dishing out money.
it's completely understandable. Those funds for Cocoa High were budgeted in the last 2 budgets, so essentially City Council has approved that. We just need to bring back those costs, and then we can remove that one from the future year's budget.
And forget about the YMCA.
The YMCA, they previously come before council requesting $350,000, and they had a request as well to Eastern Florida State College, who they leased the facility from, for some facility improvements. I know
Forget it.
some of us were just out there this last Saturday, toured the facility, and then yesterday we received a letter that they're closing permanently.
There was a decision made out of the Central Florida office in Orlando.
Wow.
And they are reimbursing the automatic
Yeah.
payments that they were
Yeah.
taking out.
Yep.
So they are going to refund money to
And I heard
individuals.
today in
Okay.
office out there that they're building a new YMCA in here.
I know they've had a proposed plan for some years
I don't know.
to raise funds, but
Yeah, the Titusville one is open, and Sierra will get a new one, but the one in Cocoa will go away.
Yeah, the one in Tree went away, and the one in Cocoa.
Century's one away too.
Oh, it's gone.
Yeah,
Bingo.
it's already gone, yeah.
And then the final request in there, we'd received here probably in the last month, Endeavor Elementary, related to their community school. They have, through that community school program, they support the health needs, psychological needs, basically all those needs that normal students would get through their family. And they've requested $25,000 for a wellness coordinator who's actually a registered nurse, and they serve as the link between the students, families, and the healthcare provider. The school currently transports students down to Brevard Health Alliance in Rockledge to ensure that they're receiving their healthcare needs are being met, as well as dental services. And so they have that request. Children's Home Society will be providing an additional amount to fulfill that full obligation for that position. I think that's the first time this council is seeing that. So I would like to have a little bit of a discussion on what we'd like to do with these.
I would
because-
think that the Endeavor, for an RN, you would think that there would be federal grant money out there for a position like that, for a school that falls in the category that Endeavor falls in. Wouldn't you think? I mean, I'm sure they're
Yeah,
on top of
I
it.
really
but
thought they had, I think this last year was the first year they had the RN in place, and I thought they had secured some reoccurring funding.
I thought so. I thought
but,
they did.
They do have a request for this next year. The Brevard Schools, Cocoa High request, that's essentially been fulfilled, so I don't think there's any need to take action on that. But we still have, and then the YMCA, I don't believe there's any need to take action on that. Really what we're talking about is the Brevard Museum and Endeavor Elementary. Facing the times that we are, I mean, we've been really focused on providing those core municipal services and ensuring that we're able to continue to provide those in the future. And so, I understand that this public health emergency has impacted these other areas as well. We're certainly not immune to those impacts, but just my opinion is just that the city shouldn't fund these programs in this next year. We can look at some alternative means to assist those organizations. For instance, the Brevard Museum, we've offered to assist them with some grants, and in fact, since the pandemic, I think there were a couple of grants that, at least one that they were eligible for, that I'd sent over that way, and told them we'd certainly support their application on that.
Would it be possible, Matt, maybe to support some of their needs with some staff, as far as like if they need repairs, maintenance, that type of stuff, grounds maintenance, whatever, and maybe look at, using the money that way as opposed to just handing over cash?
Well, just to, we had the workshop this weekend where we talked with Ben. He took us through the museum, looked at other assets in that area that I would call the educational hub of Cocoa. I don't see a sustainable plan there right now. He's looking at operating expenses, but I think there are some bigger questions for us, because we've got a section of the city that is spiraling downward, and I sure don't want that to happen on my watch. So I don't know. I feel like we need to facilitate some bigger thinking. I'm going to be reaching out to Commissioner Lober, to Representative Soroy. So they close up. So we've got this big beauty, this big building. We've got these great nature trails go all the way around Clear Lake. I mean, it's really quite a treasure. You know, I took my family over there a couple weeks ago when the weather was nice. The alligators, the ducks, all the turtles. I mean, it's a great little trail, and they've got an outdoor amphitheater, and it's nobody knows about it. Nobody uses it. And the neighborhood has just gotten signals like we closed down the fire station. So we went from having a city facility that was a public service to basically a storage shed at this point. So, and then you've got Travis Community Center, which is one of two community centers in our city. And, well, we know, you know, the county, we're not a priority. Or maybe they don't have the funds, whatever. There's not a whole lot happening there. But anyway, it's a bigger discussion, and I hope we have it soon.
Yeah, those
Just
top
see what we can
three
do.
items are all in that same area you're describing.
Yeah,
Cocoa
now the
High,
public
Barnes,
schools, I would
Lawrence.
argue, and Cocoa High School, first of all, that school's reputation and standing attracts or detracts people from Cocoa. I think it's a good argument for our investment. Not only that, but I think it was Chief Cantaloupe when we were at the graduation ceremony last year saying, most of these kids stay in Cocoa. These are our citizens. And it's an investment in them and back to them. So that's kind of a no-brainer.
Well, that was actually the reasoning behind the money that was spent to build the stadium and then turn it over to the school board. Was the school board wasn't going to do it. We built that stadium as a part of our economic development plan because you're not going to attract people to a city that doesn't
Right.
have a good school. And if you look at what's happened to sports at Cocoa High, especially football, since we gave them that stadium, we've got the bang for our buck. We
Yeah.
have a nationally recognized football program. We have 4 young men being drafted to the NFL in 1 year because of the program that's been built at Cocoa High that would have never happened without that stadium, because when you have to take your football program to another city to play, you don't get to build that pride. So that, $2.1 million investment in that stadium
That was
has
a
more
great
than paid
investment.
off.
Yeah.
And so I don't have an issue with, even though it really upsets me that the school board ignores Cocoa schools, and they can sit up there all day and say whatever they want to, but they do not provide the share of funding and the benefits to Cocoa schools that they provide to other schools. They never have, and they never will until the people in Cocoa start showing up at their meetings and demanding their rightful benefits from the taxes they pay to the school board. So if we have to do it in the meantime, little bit, $75,000 to improve the track so that the principal can attract some track and field events, maybe make a little money off of his track to support some of his other programs, I am fine with that. Because if we don't invest in the kids, then we might as well shut everything else down too. So,
Yeah, and actually, as a part of his presentation this weekend, I mean, you can clearly see how he's has brought up the academics as well.
oh yeah.
So that school is really making.
Can we get one of those little buzzers up here that they have on? Whose line is it that you can hit and just go, so they're not going back and forth? But anyway,
You could speak
I just wanted to say that what I'd like to see happen, if we can, is that we have a map. We come up with a map, and we identify all the amenities that the city has to offer, or what's in place as far as the museum, the high schools, the college, the Space Coast Sports Complex which was right on the border. Just everything we have to offer: parks, community centers, and then just kind of go from there and see where we are with all these facilities and what's happening. Because when you're trying to sell your city, you know, that's one of the things that they're looking at. What do you have to offer, education-wise? How well your schools are doing, and then what other amenities you have in there as far as entertainment. And so we got quite a bit. We have a lot of trails in there, the Cocoa Conservation. If we can identify all those areas in the city, and then just go and just maybe take a look and see where we're at with those facilities, what's happening with those facilities, so we can see what we have, and then maybe sit down and because I'm looking at Endeavor, I'm looking at the Cocoa High School, and everybody's pretty much spot on with this, but we're losing so much in our city, man. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of education here. This museum right here, education-wise, I mean, you can't beat that. The solar facility, you can't beat that. All this is in our community, and they're just kind of falling, like you say, by the wayside. And I just, just like for us to take a better look and maybe sit down and have some community meetings with reference to these facilities, and because a lot of folks don't even know they're in existence.
Well,
So-
Mr. Mayor, we also might want to look at using the platforms that we already have to help promote them, because we do have a pretty good social media operation, and we have the ability to elevate some of what they do through our website and our social media presence, and maybe that's something that we can look at doing through Samantha and Rachel, is promoting more of these things. I mean, we share a lot of what goes on in our community, but if we could encourage these people to share their special events and share the things that are taking place, so that, because if you look at our social media presence compared to some of these, we are so much further ahead of them. We have a broader reach. So maybe we can do just a little bit to help just right there. So.
If we can promote them on our websites as well. And but the thing about it is, I understand where Councilman Bover is coming from. We just can't continually bail out, maybe some mismanagement or whatever the case are, or lack of fundraising or whatever that some of these organizations are doing, and bailing out maybe even the school board, and we can't continuously do that, but we can sit down and see where they are and then say, hey, okay, we're doing this right now, but this is it, so
Well, do you
we
get the
just need to
comments
stay
I do?
informed,
Yeah, I get comments from people about, gee, I pay so much more in school taxes than I pay to my city, but I get so much more out of you. And I'm constantly explaining, no, you're really getting benefits from the schools, even if you don't have children in them, that you want the benefit that the schools are giving you. But when people look at their tax bill and they see they're paying 3 times to the school board what they're paying to the city, and then they see us spending their city money for what should be supplied by the school board,
exactly.
that's hard for them to swallow. So, Don's right in that aspect.
And I can hear that from where I live, because where I live in the retirement community, nobody's getting any kids in school, but we all pay the school tax. But then they see this on the computer that we're doing this, and want to know why we're playing double jeopardy. They're paying it on the tax bill, then they pay the taxes, and they're paying it again. And if you keep doing this, the school board's going to say, well, let Cocoa take care of it. We won't take care of it because Cocoa will take care of it. You follow me?
That happens.
And that's exactly, I can tell you right now what's happening. They're going to say, well, what the heck with it? We're not going to give them any money to Cocoa. Let Cocoa, the city of Cocoa, give it to them. And that's what's happening, and that's why I'm totally against that, funding these schools.
But sometimes us seniors forget that these kids are our future. They're our future doctors, and
We're paying it. Yeah, I know, Jake. I'm not complaining.
Yeah.
We're paying the taxes every year, but we're saying by funding out of our taxes, you're paying double jeopardy. That's what it breaks down to.
And let me just say,
This isn't the bank of Cocoa. If you want money, go to Cocoa. They'll give you some money so you can get going or keep your business going. Call
you just
Washington
have to
if you
step
need
back
money.
for a minute and clarify the record.
Call Trump.
When it comes to museums of this type,
Call Humpty
if you look
Dumpty.
across the U.S., very few actually are able, by charging fees, to sustain themselves. It's usually a combination of things. There's usually a trust involved. I don't know. Like I say, bigger minds
Okay, let's
than
get
mine, or a
moving.
combination of minds, need to get together
How is that?
and figure out something that is sustainable to have this resource available to our community.
Can we get some information on what funding the county may, do we know what the county helps with the museum funding?
Nothing.
The county does not anymore. When the Florida Historical Society took over operation of that, the county was in a strange situation where they were kind of like the middleman, where there was a lease from the city to the county to this operator, and so at the same time when we provided that $50,000 for the new roof on that facility, we also severed that agreement and did a direct lease between the city and the
So they don't get
Florida
any,
Historical
they
Society.
don't get any tourist dollars or anything out of
Not
that?
that I'm aware of, no.
Okay.
It's the Florida Historical
Well, that's-
Society that's subsidizing that.
It's absolutely ridiculous that they don't get funding from the tourist tax. They should be getting funding from the
Well, I
tourist
got
tax.
a meeting with Commissioner Lower tomorrow, so I'll throw that at him.
Yeah.
I will.
Okay, go on.
Because, a lot of folks in the county gets benefit out of that museum. It's not just the city of
Well,
Cocoa.
people actually do come from other parts of Florida to visit the Florida Historical Society in that museum. So you're right.
Oh,
The county
yeah.
does benefit.
But it is more than the museum. The
Yeah.
planetarium has gone into disrepair since Hurricane Matthew.
I'd
There's
like
a
to know
$1
what
to
they
$2
did with the
million
insurance money that they got to repair it. Yeah.
There's a $1 to $2 million price tag on restoring it. The telescope, I understand, is still in good condition, but it's a roof matter. And that area used to be known as the Circle of Science, and all Brevard school children, I'm not sure what grade, went through there. That was just a part of the program.
I used to spend every Friday night at the planetarium watching Laser Light Show because it was
Right.
the movies, you know?
So there are a number
Can
of
we take five
assets
with
there
the
that,
record?
Yeah, that's okay. We actually have the next portion of this presentation is Stantec, the city's financial consultant. They'll be doing the projection
Go ahead, I didn't know about it anyhow.
for you all. Well, we can take just a little moment to make sure we have all the systems working here.
is it already 7?
Oh, God.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Good evening, members of the council and mayor. This is Pete Napoli speaking. I've got a presentation for you guys on the results from the general fund analysis, and I also have for you here today the live model of which you can manipulate variables and discuss scenarios, and we can go over the impacts to the results. So can everyone see my screen all right?
Peter, if you could wait just a few minutes. We've got 3 members had stepped out of the room.
Okay, no problem. Just give me the heads up when you want me to proceed.
Yeah. All right. Now that we have everyone back, we've got Pete on the line from Stantec, and he's going to take us through the general fund fiscal sustainability model. This is the same model that at least our newer members went through last year, and some of our longer tenure members recall this is something that the city has been utilizing for a number of years now to not only project our current revenues and expenditures and what the net result over a 10-year period is, but also looking at that today and how we forecast forward on where we currently sit and how your decisions on revenues and expenditures impact that 10-year time frame. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Pete, and he will take you through this model.
Hello, everybody. I'm back. This is Pete Napoli speaking, and I've got the financial model that we have updated for the city's general fund forecast. This is part of our annual analysis that we perform for the city. We update the financial model to reflect the latest budgets and assumptions, and also incorporate any key issues that are unique to the city of Cocoa. So you should see my screen right now, and this is a live interactive model, you're looking at the control panel, which is a summary of some important inputs and outputs. And the power of this tool is that we can make adjustments to specific variables that are important to the city right here, and then present to you the impact over the long-term projection period. So just to recap, we have the fiscal year 2020 amended budget loaded into this model and the 21 proposed budget with all the adjustments and considerations that were presented today. We have the assumptions for the COVID-19 revenue impacts related to the economic activity downturn for both fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21. Starting from the top, I just want to review some of the key components of this control panel so you can better understand how you can use this to analyze scenarios and aid your decision making. This first section here shows the millage rate, and this is where we would change the millage rate assumption over the 10-year projection period. Currently, it reflects a steady millage rate maintained at 5.979. We also have the taxable value increase loaded in here, and this is also another input that we can adjust. Between the millage rate and taxable value increase, you can impact the projection of the city's ad valorem revenues, which are one of the only revenue sources that the city has control of in regards to the city's general fund. We have a section here summarizing the projected cash flows and also the target fund balance in each year of the projection period, and that's graphically represented by the two graphs at the bottom of the screen. On the left-hand side, we have the end-of-year fund balance that's projected in each year. And in this graph, you'll notice there's a black line. The black line represents that minimum reserve target that is required for the city to maintain. On the right-hand side, we have the projection of the cash in and cash out of the fund, and this helps you understand the trend of how revenues escalate over time compared to expenses. Currently, the panel you're seeing represents the results of the analysis at this time, and you can see that in each year of the near-term projection period, we are projecting the city's fund balance to maintain above that minimum reserve requirement. Thus, we're projecting a sustainable path forward for the city of Cocoa. We can contemplate a number of different variable adjustments. We can adjust the millage rate. We can also adjust the fire assessment rate increase. This plan currently reflects a 3% rate increase for the fire assessment program in each year. We can also add potential expenses or potential revenues and create a number of different scenarios for you all. So at this point, I'll turn it back to the city, and I can entertain any questions or requests.
Yes, so at this time it's open up to City Council. This is, as Pete had mentioned, this is an interactive model. So if you have an interest and want to see that impact projected over a 10-year time frame, we can go ahead and do that at this time.
Also, I was just wondering the taxable value increase. That goes, of course, we have what we did last year, this year, and then we go kind of up and down. And why
Yep.
is the model like that? What is that based on? Is that based on the last 10 years, or is that based on the 1-year period?
Yeah, so what we have up here is you can see in fiscal year 2020 a 12.6% increase. And that's made up of new construction value as well as existing appreciation. And that's a significant increase for the city of Cocoa. And so that's a good number. And of course, what we have are our most recent projection from the Brevard County Property Appraiser projects a 6.2% increase in valuation. And you may ask why we have a very conservative projection then going out that 3%, in fiscal year 2022. Of course, we don't really know what's going to happen with the home valuation in that market, and so we do want a very conservative assumption. Fiscal year 2023, you see an appreciation there outside of our assumed 3%. That's really due to that tax abatement on the Walmart dropping off. And so you'll realize an increase in value in that year, and then in that out year, there's also some existing vacant 140 acres next to that site that we believe will have development potential in those out years, and so we put a small assumption out there. That is correct. Yep. Yeah. Yeah, so we don't reflect that new construction value of some of these multifamily projects that we're currently processing right now. And the reason for that is there's nothing coming out of the ground yet. And in the current state of things, while everything's good right now and everyone's building as fast as they could, we know how quick it can change. And so we didn't want to go out there and provide any assumptions that may not come to fruition, and really base our development on the budget and future expenses and decisions on what we believe is a conservative assumption. We'd rather, put the city in the best position possible rather than assume something that may not come to fruition. And so that's reflected in that ad valorem line. And I think it's really important to look at those, the black line and the orange line on this chart in the lower right, because that's your cash in and your cash out, and that's what we look at. And those lines, if they're on top of each other, things are good. As you see in those out years, the first 5 years, are a good outlook for the city. And then in the out years, those expenses start outpacing the revenue.
Yeah.
And so we're going to really depend on some of those projects coming online to bring that black line in line with the orange, and hopefully exceed that orange line. And that gap would represent either a continual investment back in the fund balance, or the city could look to fund additional programs for the citizens, such as we've previously talked about, our park system. You need to have a sustainable revenue source to support that ongoing effort, and realizing an appreciation there and distancing the black line from the orange line would put you in a position to do that. And I think that would lead to a higher quality of life, and something that we really should strive for. It will take a continued focus on cost expenditure controls, as well as continued work on the economic development arena.
Can you tell me, does anybody remember the 2008, 2009, 2010, what our taxable value increase was, or was it negative?
No, it was up there.
When we went into that recession, I think with this next year, will just surpass where we were before the downturn. I think this year will be the year we eclipse that.
So then after the recession, though, then it's
it was
the
significant
taxable
double-digit drops.
double-digit drops.
Yeah,
we present that. We'll present that at the next workshop, but you'll be able to see it year by year. Significant drop.
A lot of the projects you saw happen in probably 2014, 2015, around that time, 16. The completion of Allison Creek Phase 1,
Emerald Lakes,
and then Phase 2 coming in, coming to play here recently, and then
those were projects that were underway, and then the market collapsed, and they were just sitting out there vacant.
And then you had White Chalice that was going to actually had a bill to do the old city hall there. We're going to put retail, parking, and
So, so if you take out, could I just see it if you take out the 3% tax assessment, fire
The fire assessment, yeah.
for this year. How that
Okay, did I hear
changes.
that you wanted to see the effect of taking out the 3% rate increase for the
Yes.
fire assessment?
Yes,
Okay.
just for this 1 year,
I'm
how
going to
does that
bring in
change
our
things?
scenario functionality that helps you understand the impact, and that's the current last plan. The green bars represent the last plan. Blue bars represent the plan after we make any adjustment. So when I put a 0% in the fiscal year 2021 fire assessment rate increase and calculate the model, you'll see the blue bars move. The difference between the blue bars and the green bars represents the impact of that 0% fire assessment rate increase. You can see the
But
fund
we don't
balance
feel
and
the
that,
impact
and
of that.
the end of the projection period is slightly lower.
So do I understand that we're not feeling the negative impact of that until the end of this scenario, which would be 2030?
Well, I mean, you'd feel the impact immediately, but I think what you're getting at is that, you know, if you look at the cash in and the cash out,
Yeah.
we still maintain cash in above the cash out till about year 2025, even in that scenario. And then you can also look at the fund balance reserves. You know, there's even more separation in that 10th year, and the
See, that,
9th year comes closer.
and that also affects some of the projects that we were discussing earlier. It will ultimately affect those because
The ones
what
that,
what you're losing from that 3% is going to have to be picked up from your general funds. Yeah.
Fire stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
I only ask because of this year, and I don't think we've really felt the full impact yet.
yeah,
It hasn't been as negative as maybe it could be, or maybe it will be, but I know I have a number of constituents that continue to harp on the fire assessment fee, and I found out this afternoon, I guess at one point, they felt like that was supposed to go away, and it never really did. So,
No, it was. Oh, I was there. I was a part of the start of that. It was supposed to last 3 years. And it was to replace outdated equipment that we had initially. Yeah.
Voted, the voters decided they wanted a fire assessment? That was the first year Michael Blake became mayor.
Yeah, I was on the council. We had that fire assessment fee, and it was to replace outdated equipment that we had at the fire. And they had some severe issues there within the fire department.
I don't remember an end date on that referendum.
And,
Do you, Anthony? You wrote it.
So that was a discussion when it first came about. But then, you know, today we're still here, and there's a need for it. I get it. And but it was back then. It was for a short period of time. I think it was three to 4 years. It was the goal, and that's how it was sold to the council at the time when it was brought forward.
and that 3% represents about how much average? Does anybody?
The 3% equates to a total increase in gross assessment revenue of about $80,000, and that relates to an increase of $7 on the resident's annual bill.
Okay. So just $7.
But yeah, and also, you know, we also look at the cost of the fire service overall. That includes, you know, their facilities, their personnel, their equipment, and we look at the fire assessment and what that brings for revenue and what's that cost recovery. And with a 3% increase, you're right around 40% cost recovery on that.
Okay.
Do you have the average millage rates for the county on this?
Yeah, as far as the cities?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we do typically present that during the trim hearing.
Okay.
We don't have it in this presentation, though, but yeah.
Well, you can put back the 3%. I was just playing. Yes.
But I mean, I understand where you're coming from. It's just the time, you just find out things that are happening, and like I said, this was back then. It was supposed to go away, but there's a need for it, and
Right. But, well, I mean, not to get into that in particular, but just pointing out that it's a relatively insignificant scenario to reduce by that 3%. And this model, I would imagine, is much more accurate in the next couple of years, but the further away you get, the less accurate, of course, it would be, because there are so many assumptions.
That's right, and Pete could speak onto that more, but, it's built upon a lot of assumptions and escalation factors that, while we look at industry standards and consumer price indices, it does change. You have something like the pandemic that comes along and completely changes those assumptions. So it is built on assumptions, yes.
That's correct. We typically tend to focus the conversation on the first 5 years because that is a more accurate forecast built on real knowledge of upcoming changes and a good understanding of the escalation of expenses. But once you get past the 5 years, there's a good degree of uncertainty. And, of course, as part of our annual financial analysis, we come back every year and update the model with the city to reflect the latest assumptions and any significant changes to the plan.
Okay, were there any other questions? Would you like to see anything else related to the model?
You haven't put the 3%.
Pete, could you go ahead and put the 3% back on the...
Sorry about that. Yep, the audio is not that clear. Let me calculate the model. There we go. So that's with the 3% in. That last year, slightly below the minimum reserve requirement, but that's within a margin of error. And, of course, that's the last year of a 10-year projection period, so there is a good degree of uncertainty there.
And, there's a couple of other assumptions in this model that you should be aware of. This is assuming no new personnel, which, is going to be very difficult to maintain over the 10-year period. And, I wouldn't suggest that that's necessarily accurate. As your programs change year to year and your needs, you're going to need to be able to adapt to that. As you can see in front of you, you have some room there. So if there were a need, you'd be able to accommodate that and evaluate that on a year-by-year basis. The other important note is that we have an assumption of capital spending of $1.5 million in the general fund. So just taking, for example, next year, as we're looking at this pumper truck for fire, that's half of it right there. And so there's other needs in the city that need to be met as well. So that's a very low number. We're going to have to continue to evaluate those requests ongoing and really scrutinize those numbers because 1.5 million doesn't leave you a whole lot of room to complete those capital projects, not only for what you have, but what you may want to do.
Or what might happen.
Or what might happen. Okay, if there's no further questions, Pete, thank you for your presentation, and we will move back into the city's presentation.
Okay, thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So with that, you've seen the model. We've talked about it a little bit, and this is just a little bit of a summary, and we would like to get some consensus from City Council related to that so we can continue to build the budget upon that. So the first consideration is that millage rate, And what we looked at and what we're recommending is to maintain the current millage rate at 5.9790 for the upcoming fiscal year. And that includes that projected 6% increase in property values. That would bring an estimated $382,729 to the city's general fund. That would be noticed then as a tax increase, so just so you're aware. But just looking for a consensus on that item right there.
I'm in support of maintaining the current millage rate.
Me too.
Didn't we already vote on that?
No.
We don't actually vote on that until here at a future date.
Yeah. Keep it the same rate, yeah.
Okay, we will continue with our budget development progress at that current millage rate. Fire assessment rate, as we'd spoken about, the model projects a 3% increase to continue to support those ongoing costs associated with operating the fire service in the fiscal year 2021 budget. The estimated increase of 3% would account for an additional $78,600 in revenue for the total fire assessment revenue of $2,698,600 and accounting for 40% of the fire department's budget.
I'm in support of that 3% increase.
Me too.
Same.
Okay, we'll continue with our development. So with that, we want to talk a little bit about the Water Sewer Fund, the city's regional enterprise fund. And what we have here is we want to start out by, informing not only the council but also the citizens as well as the customers that we have that may be watching or may be interested to know. We are currently working on a full water and sewer rate study, and what that is that's a complete evaluation of all of our fees and services that we provide, and we are currently in process with that project. Yep.
I'm sorry, this one slide got out of order. We were doing stormwater.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so now we're going back.
So we can change gear. I was wondering why there wasn't a title slide there.
Yeah,
but,
skip.
So since it rained out earlier, we'll go straight to stormwater. So the fiscal year 2021 stormwater budget. As you all recall, last year we set out with a pretty aggressive program to not only do a 10-year capital plan, but also look at the methodology of our current stormwater system. As we build on our utility accounts, we then went to an assessment methodology as well as established tiers based on impervious area on properties within the city. And so what we have is the first year of that program, the completion of some projects, and then now we're moving into the next fiscal year. And as we were approving that program last year, it was elected that in the subsequent years we would come back to City Council for their evaluation of that program and its rates as we looked at potential increases to support that capital program. And so what we're doing here tonight is we'll be able to show you some of the results of that program, but also what we'd be looking at for next year. And as you can see, we have up on the screen here the revenues by funding source, and you can see a percent change of 13%. That's largely reflected of the use of the fund balance reserves in fiscal year 2020. We had some significant projects that we wanted to undertake while still meeting that 4-month O&M target for the reserves. And so we also realized some grant revenue from that program. So that preliminary budget, that's assuming a 0% rate increase that you see up there. Actually, going back, yep. And then you can see in the expense budget, this fund is very constrained in that, it has very small revenue total. And so when you take personnel, operating expenses, and combine those, it represents a significant amount of the overall fund, leaving you a few dollars for your capital projects. And those, as we know, are very important for flood mitigation and water quality efforts of the city. And those projects oftentimes are quite expensive, and when you have a small fund that you want to cash fund these projects, sometimes it takes you a few years to get the engineering and to get the funds together to execute those capital projects. So what we want to talk about tonight is bringing back Stantec into the meeting here and talking about that actual rate. Because if you recall, when we did the assessment and methodology change last year, there was a projection for 2 more rate increases this year and next year of 9%. And what we had discussed with City Council last year was that we would come back and evaluate that in the budget process to determine, did we actually execute these projects in the community where the community would have enough confidence in us to be able to seek an additional rate increase? Did we go out there and work to obtain grants to further support our program? And I think what you'll find is we completed a number of projects, and there's still some out there right now that are being completed that some of the citizens are taking notice. They haven't seen work done in many years, and our public works crews, stormwater, they've been doing a lot of work. We cleaned up some of the ponds in the core of our city. We got all the ponds on a maintenance program so they don't end up in that position again. We purchased a new street sweeper that provides a benefit to the entire city from water quality perspective. And shortly here you'll see the relief channel dredging right down here near the State Road 520, which will provide a significant improvement to the water quality as well as the drainage of all that area south of 520 and east to the river. So we look at more significant benefits to show the community that
well, it wasn't that we weren't doing projects, we just weren't doing visible projects. These are visible projects, which makes it so much nicer when people can actually see.
That's right. A lot of the infrastructure, much like our utilities programs, in the ground.
You don't see that.
When you're out there slip lining and replacing these pipes, they don't necessarily see that. But these are visible projects that the community can see. So with that, I believe we have Kyle from Stantec on the line, who's going to take you through the model so you get an idea of the rates for this enterprise and what kind of capital programming it would support. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kyle.
Perfect. Good evening, council members. Kyle Stevens will be leading us through the stormwater model. And the stormwater model is very similar to what you just saw on the general fund side. We're looking at, again, the sustainability dynamics, and I've started the model off tonight by holding in the 9% rate increases that we talked about as part of the full stormwater fee study in 2019, which recommended a 9% in 2020, a 9% in 21, and a 9% in fiscal year 22. And as alluded to, that was really in order to create some resources to do capital. And so with that increase in 21, what we're really talking about from a dollar standpoint, the majority of homes in your community are in the Tier 2 rate. 9% change is about $9.96 a year, or 83 cents if you think about it monthly. That's what a 9% gets you. And what we're fundamentally trying to do in this particular fund is align the cash in here in black with the orange line, which is the cash out. And unlike your general fund, this fund is really trying to fund capital. And so you can see the peaks and valleys here from year to year as we move out to the future. And what that represents is a number of projects that are larger, years where there's smaller projects, but on average, we're trying to get that black line to go right through the valleys and the peaks. so that we can keep a sustainable funding mechanism in place and provide that capital. And what we're currently seeing is with the 9% for 2 more years, FY21 and 22, that will provide a sustainable level of funding. If I go to the operating chart here on your left, a black line represents the minimum balance we're trying to hold here. So that gives you a little bit of room above the trees if you have unplanned system failures or storm events that you would need to fund. We're trying to keep right at that target or a little bit above it, and you can see with 9% on some years will be a little bit above, but overall we're going to be very close to that when we execute these capital projects. Now, one of the dynamics that came up as we looked at this particular fund this year was the fact that you were able to leverage the fund potentially to get a grant for a significant project that's taking place in fiscal year 21. That would be the Fisk Boulevard project. And so what I'll do is in this particular chart down here, the CIP funding, you can see the funding in 21 is being all cash funded right now from rates in the fund. I'm going to go ahead and turn the grant on and calculate the model through. And actually, before I do that, let me just save this to last real quick. So I'm going to pull up here where we've got the green bars and the blue bars. The green bars are going to stay static. The blue bars will update when I make this change so that we can see how the change affects the fund. I calculate this through. What's occurred now is I've simulated those grant proceeds coming in, and we don't know exactly when we'll be notified on that. Where we've submitted for it, and likely the city will be notified sometime in the next fiscal year. But what this shows is, fundamentally, as that grant becomes available, it would free up some resources. And so our blue bars now, instead of in 21 dipping down to the fund balance target, they're actually going to stay up higher in each and every year because we haven't had to expend that money fully for that Fisk Boulevard project. And so that gives the policymakers 2 roads. You could potentially do more capital and advance your capital schedule, or potentially looking at these 9% that we have in, we could look at in 2022, I'm going to take this down to a 3% to see if that would be a sustainable plan going forward, recognizing we have these available resources now. And what we can see with this is if we drop down to a 3% inflationary level in 22, the fund balances are sustainable in each and every year. They're going to stay a little higher in the near term, but then come right down to that fund balance long term. And this would be another way to arrive at a sustainable plan should that grant become available. And so it's something that as the utility moves forward, matures, as you have these kinds of opportunities come available, we'd like to look at it in this model and then give you the feedback of how that can potentially change the outlook from a rate perspective or capital funding. And so with that, I'll open it up. If there's any questions or anything you'd like to see in the model, I'd be more than happy to plug it in for you.
Okay, so unlike what we just looked at with the ad valorem, this is not ad valorem. So, you know, we're not really worried about, in the previous charts, we were looking at assumptions, low assumptions, conservative assumptions of 3% growth or whatever. Here, that's kind of irrelevant because this is a tiered approach. What about construction costs? What are the assumptions with construction costs built into the model?
Yeah, absolutely. So typically for construction costs, we look at the engineering news record, ENR, as it's commonly referred to, as the measure of increases in that. And so what we have programmed into the model is your current capital plan projections, which are shown down here in the graphic. But in each year from FY22 forward, we've included a 3% adder in cost to assume that the cost of inflation or the cost of construction is likely to increase in the future. So we have baked in essentially into the model that there will be construction costs going into the future as an assumption of 3% a year.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else?
Can you input keeping that 9% for the next 5 years?
9% for the next 5 years?
Yep. Or the next 2. One or the other.
Next 2. And let me probably re-baseline us to go back to the no grant scenario. And so 9% for 2 years, and let me just calculate this through. Did you want to see 9% for another year?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put 9 in here, and then I'll take the 3 out. And when we calculate that through, it's going to give you you some additional resources. And so you can see in these out years, those blue bars are going to be a little bit higher than the green bars, which would mean that you could probably fill in some extra capital projects out here in the 25-23 area.
So the reason I said that, me and Mr. Smith had to look a woman in the face yesterday that in her neighborhood is cars being flooded out when it rains, right? So we had to tell her we didn't have the funds to complete a project. If you don't live in that neighborhood, it probably won't affect you at all, but the people that live in this particular neighborhood, which probably the other neighborhoods as well that have the same issue dealing with stormwater, it's tough to tell them in their face when you see a car stuck in water that the city can't do anything about it. So I do understand that, there's going to be a financial constraint, but also we have certain capital projects that need to be done. So what other way, how else can we complete them? And the citizens, they don't really understand these numbers. All they know is, their street is flooded with water, and they know that. And they're paying whatever money it is, $9, $10, $15, whatever it is. They just don't see it. Which we do have some good projects going on, but we can't do everything we need to do because we don't have the funds.
And I know those projects are prioritized, at least I hope they are. And maybe we need to look closer at that. I don't know.
Yes, so what you have is a couple of sets of projects. You've got flood mitigation and you've got water quality.
Right.
The water quality, if you recall, is born out of the impaired body of water we have to the east of us, largely due to some mandates passed down from the state. And so we do have some compliance side there, but then the flood mitigation, as you mentioned, it's not a problem until it is a problem.
Yeah.
And then there's no immediate solution.
Right.
So it is very frustrating. And so, as we look at this model, one thing that's important to note, that lower right, that's completely empty. There's no borrowing. Mm-hmm. This is such a small fund that if you were to borrow or bundle some projects together, that operating and maintenance side with your debt service, leaves you nothing for projects in the future until that's paid down, or you raise rates to the extent where you can build back some cash to fund those projects. It's no different than our enterprise fund. It just happens to be much smaller, so these projects have a much bigger impact on it. So I think what was reflected in the model of doing that initial larger rate increase, would allow that over the future years and set the stage to complete those capital projects, or as you currently have displayed in the model, build that early on to not only complete what we have projected, but also add in additional projects, complete them in the near term, search for grants to also maximize that. I mean, this is with that FEMA mitigation grant turned off.
Gotcha.
So should we receive that, it really changes the programming of that fund and would really accelerate it based on the current forecast. So,
and when could we possibly know about that?
I would have hoped a couple years ago, to be quite honest, but they continually come back. They try to do cost-benefit analysis based on the valuation and the flood stages. And so we've responded to every request in short order. Another project that we had that was submitted at the same time was for the lift station number 1 down there by Oleander Point. We've received that grant, and that's proceeding to construction this next year. So we're hopeful that it's soon, but I was hopeful about a year and a half, 2 years ago as well. So
and the lift station, that was like $1 million.
Yes.
$1 million.
I know a guy.
Five.
I know a guy that can make that happen tomorrow. I'm gonna talk to him tonight before I go to bed. And I suggest you all do the same.
Both knees.
So, okay, so I feel like with this particular program, we're kind of locked into going with the 9%. If we find that our economic situation due to this COVID surge starts to really go downhill, or the projections start to really go downhill, are we, after we've already kind of given you our consensus on this millage rate and the fire assessment, are we able to go back at that point?
Oh, you're not
Or-
locked in.
We're not locked in until the end, but, you know, that's what they always say, and you get there, and it's like, well, if you don't do this and this.
No, you're not locked in on that right now. It's just
You know, you would have to do corresponding cuts.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because, you know, in the end, you need to have a balanced budget, which would mean potential impacts to current existing levels of service or programming, so.
I mean, because we're looking at, okay, so we're only looking at about $10 here, right, for the average
I'm sorry.
Cocoan?
You were asking if you can reduce the percentage increase during the year?
No,
No.
just
No.
if we were to
Saying
see,
at-
I mean,
at
we
the
just,
time when we
we're
actually
starting to
approved-
surge in terms of the COVID,
Yeah.
and I could see where our financial projections might start to really slide as a result of that.
So this is a fee that's a special assessment on the tax bills, and we're under calendar deadlines with the property appraiser and the tax collector to get all this done within the trim process deadlines. So once council makes a decision, whichever way you're going, we can show you the numbers in July, but then from there, we have to provide that information to the county office.
Okay, so we're really making the decision then, for the most part here.
No, I thought you
I'm just
talking-
wondering what the,
Yeah.
for the average Cocoan, how much are we increasing taxes?
Outside of the, you know, because the millage, you know, really depends on your property valuation,
Yeah.
so it's really hard to determine that, but I think Rebecca has some numbers related to the fire assessment and the stormwater if you're in the tier 2.
Yes, so the fire assessment would be $7 per year, and stormwater would be $9 per year, so it would be a total increase for the average citizen of $16 per year, $1.33 a month.
And then whatever their taxes were increased to
Property taxes,
based on the
yes, ma'am.
value of their home,
Yes, ma'am.
That's right. Or
which is
exemptions.
6%, so.
Well, depending upon your assumptions.
No.
Well, I'm comfortable with that right now.
No, I was just saying
Increase
that.
it. Increase it. You ever notice that people, so a lot of times from what I've seen in my short little life, is that sometimes I know we're going to get fussed at for any kind of increase, no matter if they see a good product or not, right? We know that. But it seems like sometimes the folks that don't have a lot of money don't mind paying a little bit more for a good product.
Well,
You know, I'm just
It's stormwater
from what I've
for
seen,
their home.
You can't live without the stormwater.
it's true. I mean, if it's $16, I don't mind paying $16, and I'm on child support too, so you know, something like that.
Okay, motion adjourned.
Well,
Nothing yet.
yeah, we're not even
We've
close
got
yet.
utilities.
I'm gonna get
9:30 yet? Oh, okay.
This is important stuff. This is what you get paid for.
Yeah,
all that
this
big
is-
money.
So is
This is
there
the most important thing.
any other assumptions you'd like to look at with Kyle on the line here?
No.
I know it's freezing in here. Can we afford a new thermostat or something?
All right, so with that, thank you, Kyle. We will I think we get a consensus, so we'll go ahead and build that budget around for fiscal year 2021, a 9% increase. That's important for us to know because Bryant and his team, they've got to line up these capital projects to really get a good understanding of, you know, what are the needs in the community, what can we achieve this year. We've got this major capital project that kind of is in limbo or pending status, and so you know they need to get to work on that so they can put together a proper program to address those needs. And so if we could get just a consensus on the 9%, they can go ahead and proceed with that. So.
Yeah. And this is also, this actually comes on the tax bill. The average Cohen citizen gets it January 1st. When does this hit?
Usually it's
August, the notice of
that, yeah, they'll get their initial
and then in November, the
notice.
tax bill.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That if you
Right.
pay early,
Discount.
yeah, for that discount in November, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we'll go back to the water and sewer since we started there. We do want to start out by talking about some of the revenue trends. You can see just in looking at this chart, probably something that jumps out to you, 2018, pretty significant amount of revenue. Obviously that was due to the revenue received from a bond issuance, and so we're still, we've got several major capital projects ongoing right now to spend those dollars down. But as we look to the fiscal year 2021 budget, you see an increase there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move into this fund a little bit. But I did want to touch on, you know, the pandemic and its impacts on the water utility. Jack and his team are continuing to monitor that water production on the plant side that's going out, as well as those revenues that are received when the payments are made. And it's kind of an interesting scenario in that we're finding right now we're pretty much on pace as we had assumed we would be. Now there is some movement within that. As we know, Port Canaveral, a large majority of their operations are related to cruise passengers, and very large ships taking big draws of water isn't occurring right now, and so their consumption is down, but yet we're finding, you know, the residential and some of those smaller users is actually up, as well as some of our other larger users, Kennedy Space Center and such. So it's kind of an interesting time. So we're continuing to monitor that for any changes, because, you know, no different than the city's general fund with sales taxes. Those revenues, well, we project we're going to receive them. You don't receive them until you receive them. So that's something that we're closely monitoring. One thing I want to talk about right off the start here, so we look at the funding sources, you see a highlight on the impact fees. Why that's highlighted is that the finance department wants to more closely track those impact fees that we receive, and then also track the expenditure, because there's certain state requirements as well as accounting requirements related to those fees, and by separating in an account we can better evaluate that revenue and expenditure.
That will also assist in ensuring our bond compliance, and then also with the consultants, when they do the rate study, it separates the different components for them to analyze.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can see and Jack will tell you, I mean, they're seeing the development system-wide right now. It hasn't slowed down due to COVID-19, and so you know, we're maintaining, projecting a consistent revenue from those impact fees, so that change of negative 1%, there's really close to, you know, it's an assumption on new development, and so we're pretty well maintaining that. Charges for service, you can see all those various fees that flow into that, and we're looking at a projected change of 5% for fiscal year 2021, and that is the majority of the revenue that you receive for that fund. You have some miscellaneous revenue there, very small amount, and of course that varies year to year depending on some of the scrap metal rent and royalties that the utility receives. Other non-revenue, this is the use of the unassigned fund balance for the use of capital projects. You see a very significant number there, and what that represents is while we funded some really significant capital projects through those bond proceeds from 2018, we are now at the point of using some of our cash available to fund some capital projects. And the utilities department has a number of capital projects scheduled for next year, and you can see the use of $8.3 million from unassigned fund balance, still leaving that fund with our target reserve of that 6 months of operating and maintenance should we encounter anything natural or man-made disaster that would create a significant need immediately. So you're seeing some cash-funded projects. The enterprise fund is still in a good position in the event of an emergency or disaster, and you're accomplishing your routine operations and maintenance. And so it's a really good outlook for the city's enterprise fund. When we look at the expenses, the first one you see there is inventory warehouse. That inventory function was reviewed and kind of looked at as more of a financial function, and so it was just not that you're losing 100% of that cost, it's actually shifting elsewhere. That inventory warehouse is now under the purview of the purchasing division within finance as they do their annual reconciliation, and a lot of the functions related to the storage of that city-owned property is a component of that, and so that was moved under the purchasing division. You have the utility support services, meter readers, and field services. There's representation of 8% increase. A lot of that due to personnel costs. I think there's a couple of new vehicles in there as well for the meter readers. Administration, that cost represents the salaries for the personnel, the return on investment to the city's general fund, as well as the 6% payment in lieu of franchise fees, and then the allocation and debt service, and that's all represented within this number. The Dial water plant, as you can see, they face increased costs of the personnel, chemicals, electricity, all big cost drivers within that plant, and that's, if that's the heart that pumps the water through the system, it needs continual investment. There's a significant capital project going on out there right now, but this represents more of those ongoing needs from the well field to the plant, and then pushing that water into the distribution system, which is covered under the water field operations. There you can see a 1% increase. So there's some cuts in the operating from last year, because with the personnel costs, the 3% increase in wages, they're still realizing just a 1% increase in those costs. So they've done a really great job in their budgeting this year and ensuring that they continue to deliver that value and maximize those available funds for investment in the system for capital projects. The engineering division, we talked a little bit about that use of the unassigned fund balance. That's reflected there in the engineering. That's where the capital projects happen. And so you see that increase right there. Water reclamation, that's your sewer treatment plant. and as well as the conveyance system just down below it. But you're looking at a 3% increase, and that's assuming personnel costs, cost of chemicals. So, another one that should be recognized for bringing their budget in at a level that still supports those ongoing capital needs. Sewer field operations represents a 7% decrease. They maintain that conveyance system, lift stations out in the field to ensure that we continue to process that waste. And so, not unlike the others, they realized a reduction in costs as well. And so, overall, it represents an increase of 15%. Majority of that due to the investment in the system, in those capital projects, which is something that, as a city, we should be proud of. There's a lot of talk nationally about continually investing in infrastructure. That's what's occurring right there. And so we are reinvesting in that infrastructure, and we have the programs that are annually evaluating that, ensuring that those are the proper investments to make.
So the big increase is in the engineering.
Yep.
That's in consultant fees.
And capital
we're not
projects.
hiring.
Those are really those consultant fees are the same fees that are present in prior years. It's just you see the addition of those cash-funded projects coming in.
There's also the increase because of the anticipated litigation. So there's some increases there, they're not significant. The bulk of that, 99% of that.
Yeah, you also have that regional supply, water supply agreement that we have to the west. As we continue to progress with that project, there's some fees for services in there.
What do we have in reserves right now with utilities?
It's a good question. We have, if we just look at our projections for fiscal year 21, the revenues of 68 million, expenses of 77 million, roughly. We have a net position of 8.3, and a total capital outlay request for water sewer fund of $12 million. And so 3.8 of that's funded by reserves. I'm not sure if we have in the actual model, I believe we have those, the fund balance there for you. So with that, we'll go ahead and transfer that back over to Stantec, and they will be taking you through the model for the water sewer fund.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes. Are you there, Jeff?
Yeah, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right. Good to be with you this evening. My name is Jeff Dykstra. I'm leading the water and sewer rate study update this year. And again, we've got the model pulled up just similar to the stormwater and general fund forecast. So you're not seeing the same thing over and over again. It just looks very similar from a formatting standpoint. Just wanted to give a quick overview relative to the water and sewer RSA update, revenue sufficiency analysis that's performed in the city each year. In last year's study, it recommended a continuation of the approved 5% rate increase, rate indexing plan through 2024. As you can see here on the top line, the projected rate increase for 2021 is 0%, followed by a series of 4% annual indexing thereafter. So really, it represents a favorable financial position relative to what we projected we would be at last year. With this plan, though, we're still able to maintain really strong debt service coverage ratios throughout. That's your revenues relative to your annual debt service payments and measures your ability to repay on your debt. In addition, we have the operating fund maintaining and hitting a 6-month reserve balance over the forecast period. So really strong, strong operating reserve balance there. And I think the question was asked, what is the fund balance for water and sewer? And at the end of 2020, we're projecting it to be about $25 million. And then this plan recommends maintaining about a $20 million 6-month O&M reserve there in 2021. Another thing to point out too is just this bottom right graph shows the projected borrowing for the system. Seems like some really large numbers there, but want to point out that it's really contingent upon the level of annual capital spending that's going to occur for the system. And so as we continue to monitor this fund each year, we'll be able to more closely identify and predict when that borrowing may need to occur. The fund over the 10-year forecast period in current day dollars, you're looking at about $24 million a year of CIP, just to put that into perspective. So really capital intensive fund, and this plan with 0% rate increase in 2021 is sustainable for the utility. I have the ability to run through scenarios if you'd like as well, but just, you can see a nice correlation over time of your revenues and expenses, cash in and cash out. That's been looked at for the other funds too. But overall, a really positive message to portray relative to the water and sewer fund.
So with that, this is a live model, so if City Council has any questions or anything they would like to modify with the assumptions, you can do that at this time to see the impact.
The budget includes the project on Indian River Drive to do the septic to sewer, which will be theoretically repaid.
Yeah, a portion of that because it's I think it's a 4-month, quarterly reimbursement, so we have to kind of front the money and go back, so we try to pull that portion.
Okay.
Yeah, so even though it likely be 100% grant funded, we still have to budget the funds to get them back.
Do we have in here getting the money back, or is it just showing the money budgeted to get the project going? Is the reimbursement shown?
The budget for that project is in fiscal year 20 for the construction portion, I think it was. And then there's still $1 million budgeted for next year, and so once they go out to bid, we'll true up the budget for that.
Okay.
Anything else?
Okay, well, if there are no questions, Jeff, thank you for your presentation.
Yep, thank you very much.
So before we conclude the presentation for tonight, I do want to go back to this slide for the purposes of some discussion. Just to inform the council again, we're currently underway with a water sewer rate study, and that project was scheduled to coincide with the budget development process. It's rather complex, and with all the various funds, we wanted to make sure that not only was staff able to fully understand it and grasp what the impacts may be, but also ensure that we can clearly articulate that to the public, inform the council so you can make a proper decision. And we still have those one-on-ones as well as a workshop scheduled in the future for a January 1st implementation. Now, that's all predicated upon a revenue neutral, but as we learned with the stormwater fund last year, when you set tiers and you make adjustments to them, revenue may be neutral, but it may impact other classifications differently. So the water sewer rate study, much more complex. There's so much more that goes into that related to cost, fees, and with any kind of modification of those. there may be adverse impacts that City Council should certainly be aware of before approving them, as well as the public. And so we want to make sure.
Well, they will know, because I know the last time we did a rate study, we had city managers from cities, other cities coming in here. There were some mayors, and that's when everybody wanted to have a seat at the table with our utilities advisory board. And yeah.
And it will go to the Utilities Advisory Board as well.
Yeah, this also, that board meets quarterly. This also affords the opportunity for that board to get a thorough review and provide any recommendations that they may have. So
they'll let you know.
Yeah, and that rate study that you speak of was in 2010.
Yeah.
That was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's certainly time to provide that update. And so based on where the fund currently is and your ability to cash fund capital projects, I'll be working with Jack to look at those requested new positions, because I believe we can probably add some additional services while still being within those levels in the model to ensure that we can continue to cash fund projects. So we will continue to work on that. This budget does not have projected increases for growth, but in the past, with the system as large as it is, there's no significant growth. It really has been incremental, and so to project that kind of increase based on that, it would be conservative on right now. As we've spoken about, there's two new funds that will be created after this budget workshop, and that was that impact fee fund and then the renewal and replacement fund, and I think Rebecca touched on both of those earlier. So with that, we want to talk a little bit about what's next. July 22nd, that's the TRIM hearing, the Truth in Millage hearing, and that's to set that tentative ad valorem millage rate. August 22nd at 6, or August 26th, at 6 p.m. We have the preliminary fire protection assessment rates, as well as the stormwater assessment rates. And then the first public hearing and the vote on the proposed millage rate is September 9th. And then you vote on the proposed budget, as well as the final fire assessment, final stormwater assessment. Now, to kind of respond to Councilwoman Cost's earlier request, that TRIM hearing, that's what you set your maximum millage rate at that time, and that's the notice that goes out to the citizens. And so at that point, you'd be providing notice, and then the first public hearing of that is on September 9th. The final public hearing is September 23rd at 6 p.m. right here in Council Chambers, where we would adopt the final millage rate as well as the fiscal year 2021 budget. And so that's the rest of the program. Staff continues to work on the budget, even in advance of this July 22nd date, to look where we may realize some savings or be able to provide increased programmatic support. So with that, if council has any questions, be happy to answer them. You have members of staff as well as the public here that could also respond should you have specific questions.
I got a couple of things here. I need to get a consensus from the council. Due to this pandemic, we had canceled pretty much all of our town hall meetings. And my suggestion is that we have what they call the State of the City, where we actually all of us sit down and have the staff go through some stuff that's happening and some things that are going on. Talk about the pandemic, where we are right now with this COVID-19, and just updates on what's happening throughout our community. And it give us all the opportunity to chime in on what's happening, maybe district-wise in their districts as well. So that's something that I think we need to have, something we need to do. And then, so just want to get a consensus. How you all feel about doing something like that?
What date? What month?
Yes. Mhm.
What month would you want to?
Just whenever we can, whenever it's good for, maybe the latter part of next month or something like that, or.
We've got a number of public meetings coming up as well as grand openings.
Yeah.
So, I mean, end of July, early August?
Yeah, probably early August,
potentially?
yeah, probably early
We'll be
August.
going from August 1st to the 15th.
So,
Make it a later part of August.
And it could
I-
even into September.
yeah.
Okay. We can work with the city clerk and send out some dates and see if we can get something set.
Yeah, probably be good to do it right around the time we're doing the
You
budget.
get that, Monica?
Since we don't know where we're going to be in the pandemic, can we go ahead and make sure that we're able to
Meet.
Facebook Live the meeting or
Yep.
something?
No, we'll have the technology needs set up in the event of that.
Okay, then my other thing is I had talked to Jerry Sampson about the half bridge. Used to be a fishing bridge or a fishing pier that we called it.
The one that's about to fall down?
Yes. And I asked if that was a project that we could actually get some fine monies for. And he said yes, that was a good project, and so that they would match. And I know they send money back every year. I just like for us to just get a consensus that we look into what the cost might be associated with that.
Wasn't that
And then,
part of the Lee Winter project? Well, weren't we looking at that as part of the whole Lee Winter?
It's in the.
It is in the plan. There wasn't a cost identified in that plan. The last time we did put some rough numbers to is around 1.5 billion.
It's to the point where it either has to be fixed or something else has to be done because it's getting dangerous.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think this would be a problem, but in that interlocal agreement where the county conveyed Lee Winter parcels to the city, we didn't seek that bridge due to its current state, and so we would just go back to the county. I don't think they would have a problem.
Oh, I'm sure they'd love to
with
give it away.
They don't want it.
Yeah, I've had a conversation with Commissioner Lober, but the thing about it is I was given a price of maybe around $500,000, so I don't know, these are some different prices, but my understanding was just the undercarriage of the bridge, that the pilings were fine, and it was just a matter of lifting and those little brackets back on the bottom there. I mean, I don't know all the details, but
yeah, so
the way it was explained to
the
me.
piles and the caps
Yeah.
are supposedly, and at least the last time we had
Yeah.
it looked at, are good. It's that that metal substructure.
The metal's
which is
all rusted
like
out.
almost gone.
Oh, yeah.
And then the decking. So we did have.
I mean, I don't know when that estimate was, but I was told about $500,000, but.
And fine generally supports a 50% match.
Yeah.
So I think it's certainly, it's within the redevelopment area, and that's something we can bring back for consideration by the COCO CRA too.
And I did ask Commissioner Lober, I said, I know it's eventually either the state or whoever is going to tell them they need to take that down, so that cost, I'm sure, is going to be significant.
Mm-hmm.
So I said it'd be nice if we were to get a price here, and if it was reasonable, that if we can get the funds from fine, and then if the city and the county could go in together, split that cost of the other half, and then possibly, then you guys turn around and sign it over to the city of Cocoa, so that it can get off your books to our books, and then we will be responsible for it, But still, just as a walking up here, not a driving. You won't be able to drive on there.
Well, it's always been a fishing pier, so if it was just more suitable and safer, didn't we block it off so people couldn't get out there?
Yeah, it's currently fenced,
Yeah.
but right now there's a lot of activity occurring in Lee Winter, positive activity in Lee Winter Park with the rehabilitation down there, and folks are, they're going out there and fishing right now.
I'd just like to see an estimate, just get a general idea, get a feel for it.
Yeah, and in that
That's
interlocal, it does state at such time that they would, if they would convey it, that they would also, if we had a grant that we would submit, they would at least support it.
Yeah.
I wonder if they dropped their insurance on that like they did on Lee Winter Park too. So
who knows?
It's a significant risk.
Well, it is a significant risk for them
Yeah.
right now, especially if they didn't continue to insure it, because it's, I mean, with the boat parade the other day, it made it really obvious just how unstable that is because the river was churned. Yeah. And, I mean, it could do some significant damage if we get another hurricane, so.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, it'd just be something if we can maybe do that, if that's okay with the council.
Well, it's one of the things that's on the waterfront master plan is to encourage fishing at Lee Winter Park, and that's really the only way to do it. So,
Yeah, there's.
Well, yeah, it would be nice. You could have vending trucks out there. You can put a couple, well, we've got picnic tables under a pavilion and.
but there's not a lot of places
Great
left to
place
learn to
hang out.
fish, you know, so.
Yeah. And yeah. But anyway, and then one last thing, just one announcement, well, two announcements. They're going to be testing tomorrow at Bird Plaza, once again, from,
I think we all need to go in.
from 10 to 3. And then also for the COVID-19, and it's free. I mean, you just drive up 2 lanes, walk up.
I'll need to go in.
So if we can, just
you're
encouraging people to
negative?
go out and take advantage of that, as well as Pebbles Catering on Dixon Boulevard, 1046 Dixon. Once again, on Wednesdays, they're going to start serving the community meals again, hot meals from 4 to 6 p.m.
It's on Dixon.
1046 Dixon Pebbles Catering. And she's partnering with, I guess, the
It's right
Real
next to
Church and
Celebration
also
Church.
Celebration. So, but it's just going to be on Wednesdays from 4 to 6. So, because she felt there was a need and still a need, and so they're gonna gear back up and start doing that. So,
Now that we're moving our council meetings, we can all go.
yeah. So
That's your
This-
report, Mr. Mayor?
no, those were announcements I was just making. So, but anyway, and I wanted to get some consensus. So, but anyway, I guess we'll do reports at another date. I mean, I think everyone's ready to get out of here.
Yeah.
So-
Except I would really like to hear from Chief Lamb about,
I'd like to
not
make
put you on the spot,
Wait.
but we are in the middle of a global pandemic. We did have surged, although Palm Bay has jumped up ahead of us.
Is that a card?
no card. No card.
Oh. Oh, okay.
Can we hear from Chief Lamb, just give a little update on where we are?
Well,
and-
pretty much the mayor stole my thunder with my public service.
Oh,
and I
I'm
was
sorry.
About testing yesterday, so that was all I had to report, so I'm good.
Okay. Well, I know that we started GIS mapping.
Yes, ma'am, we
so
actually
that we have a
did.
hot map now, which is a useful tool.
Yes, ma'am.
And I feel obliged with that information, let anyone know that if they are in a hot zone, that they need to take extra precautions. If they choose not to, that's on them. But now that I know and see the map, how are we notifying people?
So what we're actually doing is we're not notifying people on where those hotspot areas are through our mapping. We're still using the community report through Brevard County. We just recently, within the last couple of months, were able to pull out that data from the Department of Health to specifically hit inside the city limits of COCO what our actual numbers were. That was one of the things that I was going to report on tonight was if you actually look at the numbers provided by the Department of Health, currently as of this morning, there's 199 cases reported in COCO. Well, again, that goes back to outside of the city limits.
Right.
If you look at actually what's in the city limits, there's 78 cases within our city limits. So we've now been able, with Chief Cantaloupe's help and his staffing, using some of the crime analysis data through New World, they've really done a good job of taking that data, heat mapping it out for us to show where those hot spots are within the city. We'll certainly make that available on our city website, so that's available to our citizens. So they kind of got a good idea of where those spots are at. If you really look at that data, though, and you look at how it's trending from April to currently, as of the 24th, where the numbers are at, cocoa's actually doing very well. We're not trending in a hot, fast pattern to the positive side up. Brevard County as a whole, certainly trending, spiking up very high.
Yeah.
So the city, as much as I hate to knock on wood, is in a good place as far as cases. The cases, we're on a level plane, but certainly the numbers are trending up fast.
Yeah.
And they're trending up
by
all
the newspaper numbers, we were up 27% from a week ago.
the county
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah.
The
So,
county as a whole.
no, it's by the cocoa numbers.
Yeah, but that's in.
But that's the
And it includes
unincorporated.
unincorporated, right?
Correct.
So I know by the heat map that we have a couple neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods, that are red hot. So don't we talked about some sort of just flyer or something going out to that neighborhood to just look, here's the deal, let's not have a block party this week.
Sure, and that public message outreach has been carried out. Samantha's been helping us on that, certainly.
And targeting?
I'm sorry?
Are they, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are they targeting?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
So when you look at the heat maps and you also the data that we have pulled since we've been doing the partnership with Brevard Health Alliance to do the mobile testing, you will see that a lot of those areas is right where we're doing the mobile testing. So that shows that we are having an impact on those less fortunate areas, or those places where people could not get to testing or could not make it to the state sites or the other sites within the county. So the city is making a significant impact to ensure that the availability of testing is out there for those who cannot reach those sites, and it's also showing those areas of significant need, and we're making sure that we get that message out not only to those areas but to other areas where people cannot travel. So to date, Brevard Health Alliance has tested over 556 people at that site. And you figure that's only 3 days. This Friday will be day 4 for us. So, you look back at that public-private cooperation that we've had with the Brevard Health Alliance and the service that we're providing to our community, to the citizens here through the pandemic, it's certainly helping us see those hotspot areas and do what we can to help and assist not only in getting them tested, but to get the information out on CDC guidelines, recommendations on how to help prevent the spread in those areas. Yes. No, the community report comes out through Brevard County Emergency Management. You can get that from Brevard County Emergency Management's website.
And just because you don't have a hot spot over your area, keep in mind that if you test positive, it goes back to your area of residence. So if you look at the village, largely commercial properties, you're probably not going to have any cases here. Is that telling the full truth? Maybe not. So it doesn't mean let your guard down. If you're in Cocoa North, don't throw a block party either. So just the message we want to put out there.
No block party.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, Matt. Are you ready? I was just.
Yeah.
Okay, then I guess that's it. And if there's nothing
Motion
else
to adjourn.
from the staff. Yes, sir.
Yeah, those those late fees, you could actually see them earlier on the presentation. They're reflected in the city's general fund because it's a function that's under the general fund as far as the billing goes. And as we looked at that, you can, yeah, it was rather small. But what you can see up there under penalties,
yep,
right there, that's an amount, and there's a pretty significant revenue loss that. Okay, that's not the total amount of revenue per year, but I believe it's right around $70,000 a month. No. So the annual revenue is around $70,000 a month, and what Laura Howell's speaking about is that in that time period of suspension, there was a loss in revenue of about $170,000.
Yeah, so the budget up there is $846,000.
yeah.
It supports the general fund with the monthly revenue. Yep.
So it's not as it reaches a certain balance as the revenue comes in, it's used to support other general fund expenses.
And then the other thing I've been asking about for almost 2 years now is security for the council. I still feel strong that we should have some kind of security system that checks to see that people don't bring some sort of weapons to the council. That's something I've been really feel that is important. I mean, we be protecting our employees at the water department. I really feel that this council should be protected also of who walks in. Just a simple scanner or something before people walk in. It could be something that's rented and utilized only for the time period that the council comes together, or something that we have on our own. Now, are we not looking into that anymore?
The question is related to safety and security right here in council chambers. Council may recall that amount is budgeted in this fiscal year. There will be a proposal coming back before the board very soon, potentially at the next council meeting, related to some improvements to be able to facilitate that sort of activity.
Last thing, I'm glad to see that we have a lot of projects coming to Cocoa, and when you have that many new residents build, taxes go up.
Mm-hmm.
They all feel it. Yes, sir. Comes to us. So I really feel that we need to promote that, yes, do consider Cocoa to come here and build, because everybody very well knows that we had a reputation that Cocoa don't really want here in the building. We need to fight that. That is something we need to change ASAP. And thank God we've got the ones that are interested.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate you.
Thank you. We got a motion adjourned from Councilman Bover. Second from Deputy Mayor Goins. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.